Chapter 45. Sacrifices. Dogman squeezed through the gate along with a rush of others, some Northmen and an awful lot of Union boys, all pouring into the city after that excuse for a battle outside. There were a few folk scattered on the walls over the archway, cheering and whooping like they were at a wedding. A fat man in a leather apron was standing on the other side of the tunnel, clapping folk on the back as they came past. "Thank you, friend. Thank you." He shoved something into Dogman's hand, grinning like a madman all the way. A loaf of bread. Bread. Dogman sniffed at it. But it smelled all right. What the hell's all that about? The man had a whole heap of loaves on a cart. He was handing them out to any soldier that came past, Union or Northman. It was he, anyway. Anyway? Grim shrugged. A baker. There weren't much time to think on it. They were all getting shoved together into a big space full of men pushing and grumbling and making a mess. All kind of soldiers and some old men and women round the edge, starting to get tired of cheering. A well-clipped lad in a black uniform was standing on top of a cart in the midst of this madness and screeching like a lost goat. 8th Regiment toward the Four Corners, 9th towards the Agrient. If you're with the 10th, you came through the wrong damn gate. Thought we were to the docks, Major. Polder's division are dealing with the docks. We're for the north part of the city. 8th Regiment towards the Four Corners. I'm with the 4th. 4th! Where's your horse? Dead! What about us? Roared Logen. Northmen. The lad stared at them, wide-eyed. Then he threw up his hands. Just get in there. If you see any Gurkish, kill them. He turned back towards the gate, jerking his thumb over his shoulder into the city. 9th Regiment towards the Agrient. Logen scowled. We'll get no sense here. He pointed down a wide street full of walking soldiers. Some great tall tower poked up above the buildings. Huge thing must have been built on a hill. We get split up, we'll just aim at that. He struck off down that street, and Dogman came after, Grim behind with Shivers and his boys, Red Hat and his crew further back. Wasn't long before the crowds thinned out, and they were marching down empty streets, quiet except for some birds calling. Happy as ever, not caring a thing for there having been a battle just now, and caring even less that there was another one coming. Dogman wasn't giving it a lot of thought either, for all he had his bow loose in one hand. He was too busy staring at the houses down either side of the road. Houses the like of which he'd never seen in his life, made of little square, red stones, and black wood filled in with white render. Each one of them was big enough for a chieftain to be happy with. Most with glass windows in as well. Bloody palaces, eh? Logen snorted. You think this is something? You think this is something? You should see this Agrient we're aiming at. The buildings they got there. You never dreamed 'em the like. Carleon's a pigsty beside this place. Dogman had always found Carleon a good bit too built up. This was downright ridiculous. He dropped back away, found he was walking next to Shivers. He tore the loaf and held one half out. Thanks. Shivers took a bite out of the end, then another. Not bad. Ain't nothing quite like it, is there? That taste o' new bread? Tastes like peace, I guess. If you say so. They chewed together for a while, saying nothing. Dogman looked sideways. I think you need to put this feud o' yours behind you. What feud's that? How many you got? The one with our new king up there? 9 fingers. Can't say I haven't tried. Shivers frowned up the road at Logen's back. But whenever I turn around, there it is beside me. Shivers, you're a good man. I like you. We all do. You got bones, lad, and brains too. And men'll follow you. You could go a long way if you don't get yourself killed, and there's the problem. I don't want to see you start up something you can't put a good end to. You needn't worry then. Anything I start, I'll make sure I finish. Dogman shook his head. No, that ain't my point, lad. Not at all. Maybe you come out on top. Maybe you don't. My point is neither one's a victory. Blood makes blood and nothing else. My point is it ain't too late for you. It ain't too late for you to be better than that. Shivers frowned at him. Then he tossed the heel of bread away, turned his big shoulder and headed off without another word. Dogman sighed. Some things can't be put right just with talk. Some things can't be put right at all. They came out from the maze of buildings and onto a river. It must have been as wide as the White Flow, only the banks on each side were made of stone. The biggest bridge, the Dogman had ever seen spanned it, railings made of curly iron, wide enough to drive 2 carts across side by side. Another wall stood at the far end, even bigger than the one they came through first. Dogman took a few gulping steps forward, and he looked up and down the gleaming water, and he saw that there were more bridges, a lot more, and some even bigger, standing out from a great forest of walls and towers and soaring high buildings. A lot of the others were staring too, eyes wide open like they'd stepped out onto the moon. Even Grim had a twist to his face that might have been surprise. "Bloody hell," said Shivers. "You ever see the like of this?" Dogman's neck was aching from staring round at it all. "They've got so much here. Why do they even want bloody England? Place is a shithole." Logen shrugged. "Couldn't say. Some men always want more, I guess. Some men always want more, eh, Brother Longfoot?" Glokta gave a disapproving shake of his head. "I spared your other foot. I spared your life. Now you want freedom too, Superior?" he wheedled. "If I may, you did undertake to release me. I have upheld my side of the bargain. That door should open onto a square not far from the House of Questions." "We shall see." One last splintering blow of the axe, and the door shuddered back on its rusty hinges, daylight spilling into the narrow cellar. The mercenary with the tattooed neck stood aside, and Glokta limped up and peered out. "Ah, fresh air! A gift we so often take for granted." A short set of steps led up to a cobbled yard, hemmed in by the grubby backs of grey buildings. Glokta knew it. Just round the corner from the House of Questions as promised. "Superior?" murmured Longfoot. Glokta curled his lip. "But where's the harm? The chances are none of us will live out the day in any case. And dead men can afford to be merciful. The only kind of men that can, in fact. Very well. Let him go." Let him go. The one-eyed mercenary slid out a long knife and sawed through the rope round Longfoot's wrists. "It would be best if I didn't ever see you again." The navigator had the ghost of a grin on his face. "Don't worry, Superior. I was only this moment thinking the very same thing." He hobbled back the way they had come, down the dank stairway towards the sewers, rounded a corner and was gone. "Tell me you brought the things," said Glokta. "I'm untrustworthy, Superior. Not incompetent." Koska flicked a hand at the mercenaries. "Time, my friends. Let's black up." As a unit they pulled out black masks and buckled them on, pulled off their ragged coats, their torn clothes. Every man wore clean black underneath, from head to toe, with weapons carefully stowed. In a few moments, a crowd of criminal villains was transformed into a well-ordered unit of practicals of His Majesty's Inquisition. Not that there's too much of a leap from one to the other. Koska himself whisked his coat off, pulled it quickly inside out and dragged it back on. The lining was black as night. "Always wise to wear a choice of colors," he explained, "in case one should be called upon to change sides in a pinch, the very definition of a turncoat." He took off his hat, flicked at the filthy feather. "Can I keep it?" "No. You're a hard man, Superior." He grinned as he tossed the cap away into the shadows. "And I love you for it." He pulled his own mask on, then frowned at RD, standing, confused and exhausted, in a corner of the storeroom. "What about her? Her? A prisoner? Practical Koska? A spy in league with the Gurkish." His Eminence expressed his desire to question her personally. RD blinked at him. "It's easy. Just look scared." She swallowed. "That shouldn't be a problem. Wandering through the House of Questions with the aim of arresting the Archlector?" "I should say not." Glokta snapped his fingers. "We need to move. We need to move," said West. "Have we cleared the docks? Where the hell is Polder?" "Nobody seems to know, sir." Brent tried to push his horse further, but they were squashed in by a grumbling throng. Spears waved, their points flailing dangerously close. Soldiers cursed. Sergeants bellowed. Officers clucked like frustrated chickens. It was hard to imagine more difficult terrain than the narrow streets behind the docks through which to maneuver an army of thousands. To make matters worse, there was now an ominous flow of wounded limping or being carried in the opposite direction. "Make some room for the Lord Marshal," roared Pike. "The Lord Marshal!" He lifted his sword as though he was more than willing to lay about him with the flat, and men rapidly cleared out of the way, a valley forming through the rattling spears. A rider came clattering up out of their midst. "Jezal," a bloody cut across his forehead. "Are you all right?" The big man grinned. "It's nothing, sir. Caught my head on a damn timber. Progress. We're forcing them back towards the western side of the city. Croy's cavalry made it to the four corners, as far as I can tell. But the Gurkish still have the Adriant well surrounded, and now they're regrouping, counterattacking from the west. A lot of Croy's foot are still all caught up in the streets on the other side of the river. If we don't get reinforcement there soon, I need to speak to General Polder, snapped West. Where the hell is bloody Polder? Brint, sir? Take a couple of these fellows and bring Polder here right away. He stabbed at the air with a finger. In person. Yes, sir. Brint did his best to turn his horse around. What about at sea? His roots are up. As far as I'm aware, he's engaged the Gurkish fleet, but I've no idea how the smell of rotting salt and burning wood intensified as they emerged from the buildings and onto the harbor. Bloody hell. West could only agree. The graceful curve of Adua's docks had been transformed into a crescent of carnage. Near to them the quay was blackened, wasted, scattered with broken gear and broken bodies. Further off, crowds of men were struggling in ill-formed groups, pole arms sticking up in all directions like hedgehog spines, the air heavy with their noise. Union battle flags and Gurkish standards flailed like scarecrows in the breeze. The epic conflict covered almost the entire long sweep of the shoreline. Several warehouses were in flames, sending up a shimmering heat haze, lending a ghostly air to the hundreds of men locked in battle beyond them. Long smears of choking smoke, black, gray, white, rolled from the burning buildings and out into the bay. There, in the churning harbor, a host of ships were engaged in their own desperate struggle. Vessels plowed this way and that, under full sail, turning, tacking, jockeying for position, flinging glittering spray high into the air. Catapults hurled flaming missiles. Archers on the decks loosed flaming volleys. Sailors crawled high in the cobwebs of rigging. Other ships were locked together in ungainly pairs by rope and grapple, like fighting dogs snapping at one another, glinting sunlight showing men in savage melee on their decks. Stricken vessels limped vainly, torn sailcloth hanging, slashed rigging dangling. Several were burning, sending up brown columns of smoke, turning the low sun into an ugly smudge. Wreckage floated everywhere on the frothing water barrels, boxes, shivered timbers, and dead sailors. West knew the familiar shapes of the Union ships, yellow suns stitched into their sails. He could guess which were the Gurkish vessels, but there were others there too long. Lean, black-hulled predators, each one of their white sails marked with a black cross. One in particular towered far over every other vessel in the harbor, and was even now being secured at one of the few wharves still intact. What the hell are Styrian ships doing here? The ex-convict pointed to one in the very act of ramming a Gurkish ship in the side. Fighting the Gurkish, by the look of it, sir? Somebody asked. What shall we do? The eternal question. West opened his mouth, but nothing came out. How could one man hope to exert any measure of control over the colossal chaos spread out before him? He remembered Varus in the desert, striding around with his huge staff crowding after him. He remembered Burr, thumping at his maps and wagging his thick finger. The greatest responsibility of a commander was not to command, but to look like he knew how to. He swung his sore leg over the saddle bow and slid down to the sticky cobbles. We will set up our headquarters here, for the time being. Major Jalen, sir. Find General Croy, and tell him to keep pressing north and west, towards the Adriant. Yes, sir. Somebody get some men together and start clearing this rubbish from the docks. We need to get our people through quicker. Yes, sir. And somebody find me General Polder, damn it. Each man has to do his part. What's this now? Grunted Pike. A strange procession was sweeping down the blasted quay towards them, almost dreamily out of place amongst the wreckage. A dozen watchful guards in black armor flanked a single man. He had black hair streaked with gray, sported a pointed beard, immaculately trimmed. He wore black boots, a fluted breastplate of black steel, a cloak of black velvet flowing majestically from one shoulder. He was dressed, in fact, like the world's richest undertaker, but walked with the kind of steely self-importance reserved for the highest royalty. He plotted a direct course towards west, looking neither left nor right, the dumbfounded guards and staff, forced effortlessly aside by his air of command like iron filings parted by magnetic repulsion. He held out his black gauntleted hand. "I am Grand Duke Orso of Talons." The idea, perhaps, was that West should kneel and kiss it. Instead, he seized it with his own and gave it a firm shake. "Your Excellency, an honor." He had no idea if that was even the proper form of address. He had scarcely been expecting to encounter one of the most powerful men in the world in the midst of a bloody battle on the docks of Adua. "I am Lord Marshal West, commander of His Majesty's army. Not to appear ungrateful, but you are far from home. My daughter is your queen. On her behalf, the people of Talons are prepared to make any sacrifice." As soon as I heard of he arched one black eyebrow at the burning harbor. "Troubles here. I prepared an expedition. The ships of my fleet, as well as 10,000 of my best troops, stand at your disposal." West hardly knew how to respond. "They do. I have taken the liberty of disembarking them. They are engaged in clearing the Gurkish from the southwestern quarter of the city. The Three Farms, is it called? Yes." Duke Orso gave the thinnest of smiles. "A picturesque name for an urban area. You need no longer trouble yourself with your western flank. I wish you the best of luck with your endeavors, Lord Marshal. If fate is willing, we will meet each other afterward, victorious." He bowed his magnificent head and swept away. West stared after him. He knew that he really should have been grateful for the sudden appearance of 10,000 helpful Styrian troops, but he could not escape the nagging feeling that he would have been happier if Grand Duke Orso had never arrived. For the time being, however, he had more pressing worries. "Lord Marshal." It was Brint, hurrying down the quay at the front of a group of officers. One side of his face was covered in a long smear of ash. "Lord Marshal, General Polder, at long bloody last," snapped West. "Now perhaps we'll have some answers. Where the hell is that bastard?" He shouldered Brint aside and froze. Polder lay on a stretcher held by 4 muddy and miserable-looking members of his staff. He had the expression of a man in peaceful sleep, to the degree that West kept expecting to hear him snore. A huge, ragged wound in his chest rather spoiled the effect, however. "General Polder led the charge from the front," said one of the officers, swallowing his tears. A noble sacrifice. West stared down. How often had he wished that man dead? He jerked one hand over his face at a sudden wave of nausea. "Damn it," he whispered. "Damn it," hissed Glokta, as he twisted his trembling ankle on the topmost step and nearly pitched onto his face. A bony inquisitor coming the other way gave him a long look. "Is there a problem?" he snarled back. The man lowered his head and hurried past without speaking. Click, tap, pain. The dim hallway slid by with agonizing slowness. Every step was an ordeal, now. But he forced himself on, legs burning, foot throbbing, neck aching, sweat running down his twisted back under his clothes. A rictus of toothless nonchalance clamped onto his face. At every gasp and grunt through the building, he had expected a challenge. With each twinge and spasm, he had been waiting for the practicals to flood from the doorways and butcher him and his thinly disguised hirelings like hogs. But those few nervous people they had passed had scarcely looked up. Fear has made them sloppy. The world teeters at a precipice, all scared to take a step in case they put a foot into empty air. The instinct of self-preservation. It can destroy a man's efficiency. He lurched through the open doors and into the anteroom outside the arch-lector's office. The secretary's head jerked angrily up. "Superior Glokta!" "You cannot simply," he stumbled on the words as the mercenaries began to tramp into the narrow room behind him. "I mean to say you cannot." Silence. "I am acting on the express orders of the king himself." "Well, everyone lies. The difference between a hero and a villain is whether anyone believes him. Step aside," he hissed at the 2 practicals flanking the door, "or be prepared to answer for it." They glanced at each other, then, as more of Koska's men appeared, raised their hands together and allowed themselves to be disarmed. The instinct of self-preservation, a decided disadvantage. Glokta paused before the doorway, where I have cringed so often at the pleasure of His Eminence. His fingers tingled against the wood. Can it possibly be this easy to simply walk up in broad daylight and arrest the most powerful man in the Union? He had to suppress a smirk. If only I had thought of it sooner. He wrenched the doorknob round and lurched over the threshold. Salt's office was much as it had always been. The great windows with their view of the university, the huge round table with its jeweled map of the Union, the ornate chairs and the brooding portraits. It was not Salt sitting in the tall chair, however. It was none other than his favorite lapdog, Superior Goyle. Trying the big seat out for size, are we? Far too big for you, I'm afraid. Goyle's first reaction was outrage. How dare anyone barge in here like this? His second was confusion. Who would dare to barge in here like this? His third was shock. The cripple? But how? His fourth, as he saw Koska and 4 of his men follow Glokta through the door, was horror. Now we're getting somewhere. You, he hissed. But you're slaughtered? Change of plans, I'm afraid. Where's Salt? Goyle's eyes flickered around the room, over the dwarfish mercenary, the one with a hook for a hand, the one with the hideous boils, and came to rest on Koska, swaggering round the edge of the chamber with one fist on his sword hilt. Whatever he's paying you, I'll double it. Koska held out his open palm. I prefer cash in hand. No, I don't have it with me. A shame, but I work on the same principle as a whore. You'll buy no fun with promises, my friend. No fun at all. Wait! Goyle stumbled up and took a step back, his trembling hands held up in front of him. But there's nowhere to go but out the window. That's the trouble with ambition. It's easy to forget, when you're always looking upwards, that the only way down from the dizzy heights is a long drop. Sit down, Goyle, growled Glokta. Koska grabbed his wrist, twisted his right arm savagely behind him and made him squeal, forced him back into the chair, clamped one hand round the back of his head, and smashed his face into the beautiful map of the Union. There was a sharp crunch as his nose broke, spattering blood across the western part of Midderland. Hardly subtle, but then the time for subtlety is behind us. The Archlector's confession, or someone close to him, Salt, would have been better, but if we cannot have the brains, I suppose we must make do with the asshole. Where is that girl with my instruments? Ade crept cautiously into the room, came slowly across to the table and put the case down. Glokta snapped his fingers, pointed. The fat mercenary ambled up and took a firm grip on Goyle's free arm, dragged it sharply out across the table. I expect you think you know an awful lot about torture, eh, Goyle? Believe me, though, you don't really understand a thing until you've spent some time on both sides of the table. You mad bastard. The superior squirmed, smearing blood across the Union with his face. You've crossed the line. Line? Glokta spluttered with laughter. I spent the night cutting the fingers from one of my friends and killing another. And you dare to talk to me about lines? He pushed open the lid of the case, and his instruments offered themselves up. The only line that matters is the one that separates the strong from the weak, the man who asks the questions from the man who answers them. There are no other lines. He leaned forward and ground the tip of his finger into the side of Goyle's skull. That's all in your head. The manacles, if you please. Eh? Koska looked to the fat mercenary, and the man shrugged, the blurred tattoos on his thick neck squirming. Said the dwarf. Boyleface was silent. The one-handed mercenary had pulled down his mask, and was busy picking his nose with his hook. Glokta arched his back and gave a heavy sigh. There really is no replacement for experienced help. Then I suppose we must improvise. He scooped up a dozen long nails and scattered them jingling across the tabletop. He slid out the hammer, its polished head shining. I think you can see where we're going with this. No, we can work something out. We can. Glokta pressed the point of one nail into Goyle's wrist. Ah, wait. Would you be good enough to hold this? I have only one hand to spare. Koska took the nail gingerly between finger and thumb. Mind where you aim with the hammer, though, eh? Don't worry. I am quite precise. An awful lot of practice. Wait, screeched Goyle. The hammer made 3 metallic clicks, almost disappointingly quiet, as it drove the nail cleanly between the bones of Goyle's forearm and into the table beneath. He roared with pain, spraying bloody spit over the table. Oh, come now, superior. Compared to what you did to your prisoners in England, this is really quite infantile. Try to pace yourself. If you scream like that now, you'll have nowhere to go later. The fat mercenary seized Goyle's other wrist in his pudgy hands and dragged it out across the map of the Union. Nail? Asked Koska. raising an eyebrow. "You're getting the hang of it. Wait, why? This is the closest I've come to enjoying myself in 6 years. Don't begrudge me my little moment. I get so very few of them." Glokta raised the hammer. "Wait, click!" Goyle roared with pain again. Click. And again. Click. The nail was through, and the one-time scourge of Anglin's penal colonies was pinned flat by both arms. I suppose that's where ambition gets you without the talent. Humility is easier to teach than one would think. All it takes to puncture our arrogance is a nail or two in the right place. Goyle's breath hissed through his bloody teeth, pinioned fingers clawing at the wood. Glokta disapprovingly shook his head. "I would stop struggling if I was you. You'll only tear the flesh. You'll pay for this, you crippled bastard. Don't think you won't." "Oh, I've paid already." Glokta turned his neck around in a slow circle, trying to make the grumbling muscles in his shoulders unclench just a fraction. "I was kept. I am not sure for how long, but I would guess at several months, in a cell no bigger than a chest of drawers, far too small to stand, or even to sit up straight in. Every possible position twisted, bent, agonizing. Hundreds of interminable hours in the pitch darkness, the stifling heat, kneeling in a stinking slurry of my own shit, wriggling and squirming and gasping for air, begging for water which my jailers let drip down through a grate above. Sometimes they would piss through it, and I would be grateful. I have never stood up straight since. I really have no idea how I remained sane." Glokta thought about it for a moment, then shrugged. "Perhaps I didn't. In any case, these are the kind of sacrifices I have made." "What sacrifices will you make, just to keep Salt's secrets?" No answer but the blood running out from under Goyle's forearms, pooling around the glittering stone that marked the house of questions in the city of Keln. "Huh?" Glokta gripped his cane hard and leaned down to whisper in Goyle's ear. "There's a little bit of flesh between your fruits and your arsehole. You never really see it, unless you're a contortionist or unnaturally fond of mirrors. You know the one I'm talking about. Men spent hours thinking about the area in front of it, and almost as long on the area behind, but that little patch of flesh, unfairly ignored." He scooped up a few nails and jingled them gently in Goyle's face. "I mean to set that right today. I'm going to start there, and work outwards, and believe me, once I'm done, you'll be thinking about that patch of flesh for the rest of your life, or you'll be thinking about where it used to be at least. Practical Koska. Would you be kind enough to help the superior out of his trousers?" "The university," bellowed Goyle. He had a sheen of sweat all over his balding head. "Salt! He's in the university. So soon? Almost disappointing. But then few bullies take a beating well. What's he doing there at a time like this?" Not good enough." "Trousers, please. Silver. Clothes with silver." Glokta frowned. "The university administrator?" Goyle's eyes darted from Glokta to Koska and back again. He squeezed them shut. "The Adeptus Demonic?" There was a long pause. "The what?" "Silber? He doesn't just run the university. He conducts experiments." "Experiments of what nature?" Glokta jabbed sharply at Goyle's bloody face with the head of the hammer. "Before I nail your tongue to the table. Occult experiments. Salt has been giving him money for a long time. For a long time. Since the first of the Magi came calling. Before, maybe." "Occult experiments? Funding from the Archlector? It hardly seems Salt style, but it explains why those damn Adepti were expecting money from me when I first visited the place, and why Vitari and her circus have set up shop there now." "What experiments?" "Silber, he can make contact with the other side." "What?" "It's true. I have seen it. He can learn things. Secrets. There is no other way of knowing, and no. Yes. He says he has found a way to bring them through." "Them?" "The tellers of secrets, he calls them." Glokta licked at his dry lips. "Demons?" I thought His Eminence had no patience with superstition. When all this time the nerve of the man, he can send them against his enemies, he says. Against the Archlector's enemies. They are ready to do it. Glokta felt his left eye twitching, and he pressed the back of his hand against it. A year ago I would have laughed to my boots and nailed him to the ceiling. But things are different now. We passed inside the house of the Maker. We saw Schickel smile as she burned. If there are eaters, if there are Magi, Why should there not be demons? How could there not be? What enemies? The High Justice, the first of the Magi. Goyle squeezed his eyes shut again. The king, he whimpered. Ah, the king. Those two little words are my kind of magic. Glokta turned to R.D. and showed her the yawning gap in his front teeth. Would you be so kind as to prepare a paper of confession? Would I? She stared at him for a moment, eyes wide in her pale face, then hurried to the archlector's desk, snatched up a sheet of paper and a pen, dipped it rattling in a bottle of ink. She paused, her hand trembling. What should I write? Oh, something like, I, Superior Goyle, confess to being an accomplice in a treasonous plot of His Eminence Archlector Salted P. How to phrase it. He raised his brows. How else but call it what it is? To use diabolical arts against His Majesty the King and members of his closed council. The nib scratched clumsily over the paper, scattering specks of ink. R.D. held it crackling out to him. Good enough? He remembered the beautiful documents that Practical Frost used to prepare. The elegant, flowing script, the immaculate wording. Each paper of confession, a work of art. Glokta stared sadly down at the ink-spotted daub in his hand. But a brief step from unreadable. But it will serve. He slid the paper under Goyle's trembling hand, then took the pen from R.D. and wedged it between his fingers. Sign, Goyle sobbed, sniffed, scrawled his name at the bottom of the page as best he could with his arm nailed down. I win, and for once the taste is almost sweet. Excellent, said Glokta. Pull those nails and find some sort of bandage. It would be a shame if he bled to death before he had the chance to testify. Gag him, though. I've heard enough for now. We'll take him with us to the High Justice. Wait! Wait! Whirr! Goyle's cries were sharply cut off as the mercenary with the boils wedged a wad of dirty cloth in his mouth. The dwarf slid the pliers from the case. So far, and we are still alive. Whatever are the odds of that? Glokta limped to the window and stood stretching his aching legs. There was a muffled shriek as the first nail was ripped from Goyle's arm, but Glokta's thoughts were elsewhere. He stared out towards the university, its spires looming up through the smoky murk like clawing fingers. Occult experiments? Summonings and sendings? He licked sourly at his empty gums. What is going on out there? Jezal strode up and down the roof of the Tower of Chains in a manner which he hoped was reminiscent of a caged tiger, but probably was closer to a criminal on the morning of his own hanging. Smoke had drawn a sooty veil across the city and made it impossible to tell what was happening any further than a half-mile distant. Members of Varuz's staff, scattered around the parapets, would occasionally call out useless and wildly contradictory news. There was fighting in the four corners, up the middle way, throughout the central part of the city. There was fighting on land and on sea. By turns all hope was lost, and they were on the verge of deliverance. But one thing was in no doubt. Below, beyond the moat of the Agrient, the Gurkish efforts continued ominously unabated. A rain of flatbow bolts continued to pepper the square outside the gates. But for every corpse the Gurkish left, for every wounded man dragged away, 5 more would vomit out from the burning buildings like bees from a broken hive. Soldiers swarmed down there in teeming hundreds, enclosing the whole circuit of the Agrient in an ever-strengthening ring of men and steel. The pounding of drums had drawn steadily closer, and now echoed out around the city. Peering through his eyeglass with every muscle tense to try and hold it steady, Jezal had begun to notice strange figures scattered below. Tall and graceful figures, conspicuous in pearly white armor, edged with glinting gold. They moved among the Gurkish soldiers, pointing, ordering, directing. Often, now, they were pointing towards the bridge that led to the west gate of the Agrient. Dark thoughts niggled at the back of Jezal's mind. Kalul's 100 words, risen up from the shadowy corners of history to bring the first of the Magi to justice. If I didn't know better, I would have said that they were preparing for an assault. There is no cause for alarm, croaked Varuz. Our defenses are impregnable. His voice quavered, then cracked entirely at the final word, doing little to give anyone the slightest reassurance. Only a few short weeks ago, nobody would have dared to suggest that the Agrient could ever fall. But nobody would ever have dreamed that it would be surrounded by legions of Gurkish soldiers either. Very plainly, The rules had changed. A deep blast of horns rang out. "Down there," muttered one of his staff. Jezal peered through his borrowed eyeglass. Some form of great cart had been drawn up through the streets, like a wooden house on wheels, covered by plates of beaten metal. Even now, Gurkish soldiers were loading barrels into it under the direction of 2 men in white armor. "Explosive powder," someone said, unhelpfully. Jezal felt Moravia's hand on his arm. "Your Majesty, it might be best if you were to retire." "And if I am not safe here, where precisely will I be out of danger, do you suppose? Marshal West will soon deliver us, I'm sure. But in the meantime, the palace is much the safest place. I will accompany you." He gave an apologetic smile. "At my age, I fear I will be little use on the walls." Gorst held out one gauntleted hand towards the stairs. "This way, growled Glokta, limping up the hall as swiftly as his ruined feet would carry him, Koska ambling after. Click, tap, pain. Only one secretary remained outside the office of the High Justice, peering disapprovingly over his twinkling eyeglasses. No doubt the rest have donned ill-fitting armor and are manning the walls, or, more likely, have locked themselves in cellars. If only I were with them. I am afraid his worship is busy. Oh, he will see me, don't worry about that." Glokta hobbled past without stopping, placed his hand on the brass doorknob of Moravia's office and almost jerked it back in surprise. The metal was icy cold, cold as hell. He turned it with his fingertips and opened the door a crack. A breath of white vapor curled out into the hall, like the freezing mist that would hang over the snowy valleys in England in the midst of winter. It was deathly cold in the room beyond. The heavy wooden furniture, the old oak paneling, the grubby window panes, all glittered with white hoarfrost. The heaps of legal papers were furry with it. A bottle of wine on a table by the door had shattered, leaving behind a bottle-shaped block of pink ice and a scattering of sparkling splinters. What in hell? Glokta's breath smoked before his smarting lips. Mysterious articles were scattered widely about the wintry room. A long, snaking length of black tubing was frozen to the paneling, like a string of sausages left in the snow. There were patches of black ice on the books, on the desk, on the crunching carpet. There were pink fragments frozen to the ceiling, long white splinters frozen to the floor. Human remains. A large chunk of icy flesh, partly coated in rime, lay in the middle of the desk. Glokta turned his head sideways to better take it in. There was a mouth, still with some teeth attached, an ear, an eye, some strands of a long beard. Enough in the end, for Glokta to recognize whose parts were scattered so widely around the freezing room. Who else but my last hope, my third suitor, High Justice Moravia? Koska cleared his throat. "It seems there is something to your friend Silber's claims after all. An understatement of devilish proportions." Glokta felt the muscles round his left eye twitching with a painful intensity. The secretary fussed up to the door behind them, peered through, gasped and reeled away. Glokta heard him being noisily sick outside. "I doubt the High Justice will be lending us much assistance." "True. But isn't it getting a little late in the day for your papers and so forth anyway?" Koska gestured towards the windows, flecked and spotted with frozen blood. "The Gurkish are coming, remember? If you've scores to settle, get them settled now before our Kantic friends tear up all the bills. When plans fail, swift action must serve a superior." He reached behind his head, unbuckled his mask, and let it drop to the floor. "Time to laugh in your enemy's face, to risk all on one final throw. You can pick up the pieces afterward. If they don't go back together, well, what's the difference? Tomorrow we might all be living in a different world, or dying in one. Not the way we wanted it, maybe, but he is right. Perhaps we might borrow one final shred of Colonel Glokta's stash before the game is over. I hope I can still count on your help." Koska clapped him on the shoulder and sent a painful shudder through his twisted back. "A noble last effort against all the odds, of course, though I should mention that I usually charge double once the diabolical arts are involved. How does triple sound? After all, Valent and Balk have deep pockets." Koska's grin grew wider. "It sounds well. And your men? Are they reliable? They are still waiting for 4/5 of their pay. Until they receive it, I would trust any one of them with my life. Good. Then we are prepared. Glokta worked his aching foot around in his boot. Just a little further now, my toeless beauty. Just a few shuddering steps more, and one way or another we both can rest. He opened his fingers and let Goyle's confession float down to the frosty floor. To the university, then. His Eminence has never liked to be kept waiting. Chapter 46. Opened the box. Logen could feel the doubt in the men around him, could see the worry on their faces, in the way they held their weapons, and he didn't blame them. A man can be fearless on his own doorstep against enemies he understands, but take him long miles over the salty sea to strange places he never dreamed of. He'll take fright at every empty doorway, and there were an awful lot of those now. The city of white towers, where Logen had hurried after the first of the Magi, amazed at the scale of the buildings, the strangeness of the people, the sheer quantity of both, had become a maze of blackened ruins. They crept down empty streets, lined with the outsized skeletons of burned-out houses, charred rafters stabbing at the sky. They crept across empty squares, scattered with rubble and dusted with ash. Always the sounds of battle echoed ghostly near-far all around them. It was as if they crept through hell. "How'd you fight in this?" whispered the Dogman. Logen wished he had an answer. Fighting in forests, in mountains, in valleys, they'd done it all 100 times, and knew the rules. But this, his eyes flickered nervously over the gaping windows and doorways, the piles of fallen stones, so many places for an enemy to hide. All Logen could do was aim at the house of the Maker and hope for the best. What would happen when they got there? He wasn't sure, but it seemed a safe bet there'd be blood involved. Nothing that would do anyone the slightest good, most likely. But the fact was he'd said, go, and the one thing a leader can't do is change his mind. The clamor of fighting was getting louder now, and louder. The stink of smoke and anger was picking at his nose, scratching at his throat. The scored metal of the Maker's sword was slippery in his sweaty palm. He crept low to the ground, over a heap of rubble and along beside a shattered wall, his hand held flat behind him to say, "Go careful." He eased up to the edge and peered around it. The Agrient rose up just ahead, great walls and towers black against the white sky, a second set reflected in the moat below. A lot of men were gathered near the water, crowded up and down the cobbled space as far as Logen could see. It didn't take a sharp mind to realize they were Gurkish. Arrows flitted up towards the battlements, bolts flitted back down, spinning from the cobbles, sticking wobbling into wooden screens. Not 30 strides away they'd drawn up a line, facing into the city. A good, clean line, bristling with spears, set out on either side of a tall standard, golden letters twinkling on it. A tough-looking line of hard men, well-armed and well-armored, nothing like the rubbish they'd faced outside the walls. Logen didn't reckon shouting was going to get this lot moving anywhere, except straight at him, maybe. "Whoa," muttered the Dogman as he crept up. A few more Northmen followed him, spreading out in the mouth of the street, staring stupidly around. Logen waved an arm at them. "Might be best if we stay out of sight for the D." An officer in the midst of the Gurkish line barked in his harsh tongue, pointed towards them with his curved sword. "Ah, shit!" hissed Logen. They came forward, fast but organized, a mass of them and bristling with bright, sharp, deadly metal. There are only 3 choices when you get charged: run away, stand, or charge yourself. Running away isn't usually a bad option, but given the way the rest of the boys were feeling, if they ran they wouldn't stop running until they fell in the sea. If they stood, all in a puzzled mess from coming through the city, the chances were good they'd break, and that would leave some dead and do nothing for the rest. Which left one choice, and that's no choice at all. 2 charges in 1 day. Shitty luck, that, but there was no use crying about it. You have to be realistic about these things. Logen started running. Not the way he wanted to, but forward, out from the buildings and across the cobbles towards the moat. He didn't give too much thought to whether anyone was following. He was too busy screaming and waving his sword around. The first into the killing, just like in the old days. A fitting end for the Bloody Nine. A fitting end for the Bloody Nine. Be a good song, maybe, if anyone could be bothered finding a tune for it. He gritted his teeth, waiting for the terrible impact. Then a crowd of Union soldiers came pouring from the buildings on the left, shouting like madmen themselves. The Gurkish charge faltered. Their line began to break up. spears swinging wildly as men turned to face the sudden threat. An unexpected bonus, and no mistake. The Union crashed into the end of the line. Men screeched and bellowed, metal shrieked on metal, weapons flashed, bodies dropped, and Logen fell into the midst of it. He slid past a wobbling spear, slashed at a Gurkish soldier. He missed and hit another, sent him screaming, blood bubbling down chainmail. He rammed into a third with his shoulder and flung him on his back, stomped on the side of his jaw and felt it crunch under his boot. The Gurkish officer who'd led the charge was only a stride away, his sword ready. Logen heard a bowstring behind, and an arrow took the officer near the collarbone. He dragged in a shuddering breath to scream, half spinning round. Logen chopped a deep gash through his backplate, spots of blood jumping. Men crunched into the remains of the line around him. A spear shaft bent up and shattered, sending splinters flying in Logen's face. Someone roared right next to him and made his ear buzz. He jerked his head away to see a Carl throw a desperate hand up. A curved sword sliced into it and sent a thumb spinning. Logen hacked the Gurkish soldier who'd swung it in the face, the heavy blade of the Maker's sword catching him across the cheek and splitting his skull wide. A spear flashed at him. Logen tried to turn sideways, gasped as the point slid through his shirt and down his right side, leaving a cold line under his ribs. The man who held it stumbled on towards him, moving too quick to stop. Logen stabbed him right through, just under his breastplate, ended up blinking in his face. A Union soldier with a patchy ginger beard on his cheeks. The man frowned, puzzled at seeing another white face. "Wah," he croaked, clutching at him. Logen tore away, one hand pressed to his side. It was wet there. He wondered if the spear had nicked him or run him right through. He wondered if it had killed him already, and he had just a last few bloody moments left. Then something hit him on the back of his head, and he was reeling, bellowing, not knowing what was happening. His limbs were made of mud. The world wobbled about, full of flying dirt and flying edges. He hacked at something, kicked at something else. He grappled with someone, snarling, tore his hand free and fumbled out a knife, stabbed at a neck, black blood flowing. The sounds of battle roared and hummed in his ears. A man staggered past with part of his face hanging off. Logen could see right inside his mangled mouth from the side, bits of teeth falling out. The cut down his side burned and sucked his breath out. The knock on his head made the pulse pound in his skull, made the blurry world slide from side to side. His mouth was full of the salt metal taste of blood. He felt a touch on his shoulder and lurched around, teeth bared, fingers tight round the grip of the Maker's blade. Dogman let go of him and held up his hands. "It's me! It's me!" Logen saw who it was, but it wasn't his hand that held the sword now. And the bloody nine saw only work that needed doing. What a curious flock this crippled shepherd has acquired. 24 fake practicals followed Glokta through the deserted lanes of the Agrient, Nikomo Koska, infamous soldier of fortune, swaggering at their head. My hopes all entrusted to the world's least trustworthy man. One of them dragged the bound and gagged superior Goyle stumbling along by a rope, like an unwilling dog being taken for a walk. Ade West shuffled in their midst, her white dress stained with the filth of the sewers and the blood of several men, her face stained with darkening bruises and a haunted slackness. No doubt the result of the several horrors she has already witnessed today, all capering through the Agrient after the Inquisition's only crippled superior. A merry dance to hell, accompanied by the sounds of distant battle. He lurched to a sudden halt. An archway beside him led through into the square of marshals and, for some reason beyond his comprehension, the whole wide space had been covered with sawdust. In the middle of that yellow-white expanse, perfectly recognizable even over this distance, the first of the Magi stood, waiting. Beside him was the dark-skinned woman who had nearly drowned Glokta in his bath. "My two favorite people in all the world, I do declare." "Bayaz," hissed Glokta. "No time for that." Koska caught him by the elbow and pulled him away, and the first of the Magi and his sullen companion passed out of view. Glokta limped on, down the narrow lane, winced as he turned a corner, and found himself staring directly into the face of his old acquaintance, Jezal Dan Luther. Or should I say the High King of the Union? "I am painfully honored, Your Majesty," he said, lowering his head and causing a particularly unpleasant stabbing through his neck. Koska, just appearing beside him, gave an extravagant bow, reaching for his cap to sweep it from his head. It was gone. He shrugged his shoulders apologetically and tugged at his greasy forelock. Luther frowned at him, and at each member of his strange group as they appeared. Someone seemed to be lurking at the back of the royal entourage, a robe of black and gold in amongst all that polished steel. Could that be our old friend the High Justice? But surely he is in frozen pieces. Then Ardi shuffled around the corner. Luther's eyes went wide. Ardi. Jezal. She looked every bit as amazed as he did. And the air was ripped apart by a colossal explosion. The middle way was not what it used to be. West and his staff rode northwards in stunned silence. Their horses' hooves tapped at the cracked road. A sorry bird cheeped from the bare rafters of a burned-out house. Someone in a side street squealed for help. From the west, the vague sounds of fighting still echoed, like the noise of a distant sporting event, but one with no winners. Fire had swept through the center of the city, turning whole swathes of buildings to blackened shells, the trees to gray claws, the gardens to patches of withered slime. Corpses were the only addition, corpses of every size and description. The Four Corners was a slaughter yard, scattered with all the ugly garbage of war, bounded by the ruined remains of some of Adua's finest buildings. Near at hand, the wounded were laid out in long rows on the dusty ground, coughing, groaning, calling for water, bloody surgeons moving helplessly among them. A few grim soldiers were already piling the Gurkish dead into formless heaps, masses of tangled arms, legs, faces. They were watched over by a tall man, with his hands clenched behind his back. General Croy, always quick to put things in order. His black uniform was smudged with gray ash, one torn sleeve flapping around his wrist. The fighting must have been savage indeed to make a mark on his perfect presentation, but his salute was unaffected. It could not have been more impeccable if they stood on a parade ground. Progress, General. Progress, General. Bitter fighting through the central district, Lord Marshal. Our cavalry broke through this morning, and we took them by surprise. Then they counterattacked while we were waiting for the foot. I swear, this weary patch of ground has changed hands a dozen times. But we have the Four Corners now. They're fighting hard for every stride, but we're driving them back towards our knolls. Whoa. Look at that now! He pointed to a pair of Gurkish standards leaning against a length of crumbling masonry, their golden symbols gleaming in the midst of that drab destruction. They'll make a fine centerpiece to anyone's living room, sir? West could not stop his eyes wandering down to a group of groaning wounded lolling against the wall below. I wish you joy of them. The Agrient! The news is less good there, I'm afraid. We're pushing them hard, but the Gurkish are up in numbers. They still have the citadel entirely surrounded. Push harder, General. Croy snapped out another salute. Yes, sir. We'll break them. Don't you worry. Might I ask how General Polder is doing with the docks? The docks are back in our hands, but General Polder is dead. There was a pause. Dead? Croy's face had turned deathly pale. But how did he? There was a rumble like thunder in the distance, and the horses shied, pawed at the ground. West's face and Croy's, and the faces of their officers, all turned as one to the north. There, over the tops of the blackened ruins at the edge of the square, a great mass of dust was rising high above the Agrient. The bright world spun and throbbed, full of the beautiful song of battle, the wonderful taste of blood, the fine and fruitful stink of death. In the midst of it, no further than arm's length away, a small man stood, watching him. To come so close to the bloody nine, to ask for death as surely as to step into the searing fire, to beg for death, to demand it. Something about his pointed teeth seemed familiar, a faint memory from long ago. But the bloody nine pushed it away, shook it off, sunk it in the bottomless sea. It meant nothing to him who men were, or what they had done. He was the great leveler, and all men were equal before him. His only care was to turn the living into the dead, and it was past time for the good work to begin. He raised the sword. The earth shook. He stumbled, and a great noise washed over him, tore between the dead men and the living, split the world in half. He felt it knock something loose inside his skull. He snarled as he righted himself, lifted the blade high except the arm would not move. Bastard, snarled the bloody nine. but the flames were all burned out. It was Logen who turned towards the noise. A vast cloud of grey smoke was rising up from the wall of the agrient, a few hundred strides away. Spinning specks flew up high above it, leaving arching trails of brown dust in the sky, like the tentacles of some vast sea monster. One seemed to reach its peak just above them. Logen watched it fall. It had looked like a pebble at first. As it tumbled slowly down, he realized it was a chunk of masonry the size of a cart. "Shit," said Grim. There was nothing else to say. It crashed through the side of a building right in the midst of the fight. The whole house burst apart, flinging broken bodies in every direction. A broken timber whirred past the Dogman and splashed into the moat. Specks of grit nipped at the back of Logen's head as he flung himself to the ground. Choking dirt billowed out across the road. He retched, one hand over his face. He wobbled up to standing, the dusty world lurching around him, using his sword as a crutch, ears still ringing from the noise, not sure who he was, let alone where. The bones had gone right out of the battle by the moat. Men coughed, stared, wandered in the gloom. There were a lot of bodies, Northmen, Gurkish, Union, all mixed up together. Logen saw a dark-skinned man staring at him, blood running down his dusty face from a cut above one eye. Logen lifted his sword, gave a throaty roar, tried to charge and ended up staggering sideways and nearly falling over. The Gurkish soldier dropped his spear and ran off into the murk. There was a second deafening detonation, this one even closer, off to the west. A sudden blast of wind ripped at Jezal's hair, nipped at his eyes. Swords rang from sheaths. Men stared up, faces slack with shock. "We must go," piped Gorst, taking a firm grip on Jezal's elbow. Glokta and his henchmen were already making off down a cobbled lane, as quickly as the superior could limp. Ardi gave one brief look over her shoulder, eyes wide. Wait. Seeing her like that had given Jezal a sudden and painful rush of longing. The idea of her in the thrall of that disgusting cripple was almost too much to bear. But Gorst was having none of it. "The palace, your majesty." He ushered Jezal away towards the park without a backward glance, the rest of the royal bodyguard clattering after. Fragments of stone began to click off the roofs around them, to bounce from the road, to ping from the armor of the knights of the body. "They are coming," muttered Morovia, staring grimly off towards the square of marshals. Pharaoh squatted, hands held over her head, the monstrous echoes still booming from the high white walls. A stone the size of a man's head fell out of the sky and burst apart on the ground a few strides away, black gravel scattering across the pale sawdust. A boulder 10 times as big crashed through the roof of a building, sent glass tinkling from shattered windows. Dust billowed out from the streets and into the square in grey clouds. Gradually the noise faded. The man-made hailstorm rattled to a stop, and there was a pregnant silence. There was a crash somewhere in the streets, the sound of men shouting, then a long scream suddenly cut off. He turned towards her, his jaw working nervously. "Once we begin, do not move from the spot. Not a hair. The circles have been carefully. Keep your mind on your own part, Magus." "Then I will. Open the box, Pharaoh." She stood, frowning, her fingertips rubbing at her thumbs. Once it was opened, there would be no going back. She felt it. "Now," snapped Bayaz. "Now if you want your vengeance, SSS." But the time for going back was far behind her. She squatted down, laying her hand on the cool metal of the lid. A dark path was the only choice, and always had been. She found the hidden catch, and pressed it in. The box swung silently open, and that strange thrill seeped, then flowed, then poured out over her and made the air catch in her throat. The seed lay inside, nestling on its metal coils, a dull, grey, unremarkable lump. She closed her fingers round it, lead-heavy and ice-cold. She lifted it from the box. Good, but Bayaz was wincing as he watched her, face twisted with fear and disgust. She held it out towards him, and he flinched back. There were beads of sweat across his forehead. "Come no closer!" Pharaoh slammed the box shut. 2 Union guards, clad in full armor, were backing into the square, heavy swords in their fists. There was a fear in the way they moved, as if they were retreating from an army. But only one man rounded the corner. A man in white armor, worked with designs of shining metal. His dark face was young and smooth and beautiful, but his eyes seemed old, Pharaoh had seen such a face before, in the wastelands near Dagoska. An eater. The two guards came at him together, one shouting a shrill battle cry. The eater shrugged effortlessly around their swords, came forward in a sudden blur, caught one of the Union men with a careless flick of his open hand. There was a hollow clang as it caved in his shield and breastplate both, lifted him flailing into the air. He crunched down some 20 strides from where he had been standing, rolled over and over, leaving dark marks in the pale sawdust. He flopped to rest not far from Pharaoh, coughed out a long spatter of blood and was still. The other guard backed away. The eater looked at him, a sadness on his perfect face. The air around him shimmered. Briefly, the man's sword clattered down. He gave a long squeal and clutched at his head. It burst apart, showering fragments of skull and flesh across the walls of the white building beside him. The headless corpse slumped to the ground. There was a pause. "Welcome to the Agriant," shouted Bayaz. Pharaoh's eyes were drawn up by a flash of movement. High above, a figure in white armor dashed across a roof. They made an impossible leap across the wide gap to the next building and vanished from sight. In the street below, a woman flowed out of the shadows and into the square, dressed in glittering chainmail. Her hips swayed as she sauntered forwards, a happy smile on her flawless face. A long spear carried loose in one hand. Pharaoh swallowed, shifted her fist around the seed, gripping it tight. Part of a wall collapsed behind her, blocks of stone tumbling out across the square. A huge man stepped through the ragged gap, a great length of wood in his hands, studded with black iron, his armor and his long beard coated in dust. Two others followed, a man and a woman, all with the same smooth skin, the same young faces and the same old black eyes. Pharaoh scowled round at them as she slid her sword out, the cold metal glinting. Useless maybe, but holding it was some kind of comfort. "Welcome to you all," called Bayaz. "I've been waiting for you, Mammon." The first of the eaters frowned as he stepped carefully over the headless corpse. "And we for you." White shapes flitted from the roofs of the buildings, thumped down into the square in crouches, and stood tall. 4 of them, one to each corner. "Where's that creeping shadow, Ui? He could not be with us." Zacharias, mired in the ruined west, trying to heal a corpse with a bandage. Cornel, too much in love with what she used to be to spare a thought for what comes. "You are left all alone, then, in the end, apart from this." Mammon turned his empty gaze on Pharaoh. "She is a strange one." "She is, and exceptionally difficult, but not without resources." Pharaoh scowled and said nothing. If anything needed saying, she could talk with her sword. "Ah, well," Bayaz shrugged. "I have always found myself my own best counsel. I have always found myself my own best counsel. What choice have you? You destroyed your own order with your pride and your arrogance and your hunger for power." More figures stepped from doorways round the square, strolled unhurried from the streets. Some strutted like lords, some held hands like lovers. Power is all you ever cared for, and you are left without even that. The first of the Magi, and the last, so it would seem. Does that not please you? I take no pleasure in this, Bayaz. This is what must be done. Ah, a righteous battle? A holy duty? A crusade, perhaps? Will God smile on your methods, do you think? Mamun shrugged. God smiles on results. More figures in white armor spilled into the square and spread out around its edge. They moved with careless grace, with effortless strength, with bottomless arrogance. Pharaoh frowned around at them. The seed clutched tight at one hip, her sword at the other. "If you have a plan," she hissed, "now might be the time." But the first of the Magi only watched as they were surrounded, the muscles twitching on the side of his face, his hands clenching and unclenching by his sides. A shame that Kalul himself could not pay a visit. "But you have brought some friends with you, I see. 100, as I promised. Some few have other tasks about the city. They send their regrets. But most of us are here for you, more than enough." The eaters were still. They stood facing inwards, spread out in a great ring with the first of the Magi at their center. Pharaoh Maljin felt no fear, of course. But these were poor odds. "Answer me one thing," called Mamun. "Since we are come to the end, why did you kill Juvens? Juvens! Ha! He thought to make the world a better place with smiles and good intentions. Good intentions get you nothing, and the world does not improve without a fight. I say I killed no one. Bayaz looked sideways at Pharaoh. His eyes were feverish bright now. His scalp glistened with sweat. But what does it matter who killed who 1,000 years ago? What matters is who dies today. True. Now at last you will be judged. Slowly, very slowly, the circle of eaters began to contract, stepping gently forward as one, drawing softly inwards. The first of the Magi gave a grim smile. "Oh, there will be a judgment here, Mammon. On that you can depend. The magic has drained from the world. My art is a shadow of what it was. But you forgot, while you were gorging yourselves on human meat, that knowledge is the root of power. High art I learned from Juvens. Making I took from Canidius. You will need more than that to defeat us, of course. For that, I need some darker medicine." The air around Bayaz's shoulders shimmered. The eaters paused. Some of them raised their arms in front of their faces. Pharaoh narrowed her eyes, but there was only the gentlest breath of wind, a subtle breeze that washed out from the first of the Magi in a wave, that lifted the sawdust from the stones and carried it out in a white cloud to the very edge of the square of marshals. Mamun looked down and frowned. Set into the stone beneath his feet, metal shone dully in the thin sunlight. Circles and lines and symbols and circles within circles, covering the entire wide space in a single vast design. 11 wards and 11 wards reversed, said Bayaz. Iron, quenched in salt water. An improvement suggested by Canidius researchers. Glustrad used raw salt. That was his mistake. Mamun looked up. The icy calmness vanished from his face. "You cannot mean." His black eyes flickered to Pharaoh, then down to her hand, clenched tight around the seed. "No, the first law. The Magus showed his teeth. "Rules are for children. This is war, and in war the only crime is to lose. The word of use." Bayaz's lip curled. "Ah, let him come forth and stop me." "Enough." One of the eaters leaped forward, flashing across the metal circles towards their center. Pharaoh gasped as the stone in her hand turned suddenly, terribly cold. The air about Bayaz twisted, danced, as though he was reflected in a rippling pool. The eater sprang up, mouth open, the bright blade of his sword shining. Then he was gone. So were 2 others behind him. A long spray of blood was smeared across the ground where one of them had been standing. Pharaoh's eyes followed it, growing wider and wider. Her mouth fell open. The building that had stood behind them had a giant, gaping hole torn out of it from ground to dizzy roof. A great canyon lined with broken stone and hanging plaster, with splintered spars and dangling glass. Dust showered from the shattered edges and into the yawning hole below. A flock of torn papers fluttered down through the empty air. From out of the carnage a thin and agonized screaming came. A sobbing, a screech of pain. Many voices. The voices of those who had been using that building as a refuge. Poor luck for them. Bayaz's mouth slowly curled up into a smile. "It works," he breathed. Chapter 47, Dark Paths. Jezal hurried through the tall archway and into the gardens of the palace, his knights around him. It was remarkable that High Justice Morovia had been able to keep pace with them on their dash through the Agrient, but the old man scarcely seemed out of breath. "Seal the gates!" he bellowed. "The gates!" he bellowed. The huge doors were heaved shut. 2 beams the thickness of ship's masts swung into position behind them. Jezal allowed himself to breathe a little easier. There was a reassuring feeling to the weight of those gates, to the height and thickness of the walls of the palace compound, to the sizable host of well-trained and armored men defending it. Morovia laid his hand gently on Jezal's shoulder, began to steer him down the cobbled path towards the nearest door into the palace. "We should find the safest place possible, Your Majesty." Jezal shook him off. "Would you lock me in my bedroom, or should I hide in the cellar? I will remain here and coordinate the defense of..." A long, blood-chilling scream came from the other side of the wall and echoed around the bare gardens. It was as if that shriek made a hole in him through which all confidence quickly leaked away. The gates rattled slightly against the mighty beams, and the notion of hiding in the cellar gained appeal with astonishing speed. "A lion!" barked Gorst's shrill voice. "To the king!" A wall of heavily armored men clustered instantly around Jezal, swords drawn, shields raised. Others kneeled in front, pulling bolts from quivers, turning the cranks of their heavy flatbows. All eyes were fixed on the mighty double doors. They rattled gently again, wobbled slightly. "Down there?" someone called from the walls above. "Down!" There was a screech, and an armored man plummeted from the battlements and crunched into the turf. His body trembled, then fell limp. "How?" someone muttered. A white figure dived from the walls, gracefully turned over in the air, and thudded onto the pathway in front of them. It stood up. A dark-skinned man, arrayed in armor of white and gold, his face smooth as a boy's. He held a spear of dark wood with a long, curved blade in one hand. Jezal stared at him, and he looked back, expressionless. There was something in those black eyes, or rather there was something missing from them. Jezal knew that this was not a man. It was an eater, a breaker of the second law, one of Khalul's 100 words, come to settle ancient scores with the first of the Magi. It seemed, rather unfairly, that their score had somehow come to include Jezal. The eater raised one hand, as if in blessing. "May God admit us all to heaven. May God admit us all to heaven." "Loose!" squealed Gorst. Flatbows rattled and popped. A couple of bolts glanced off the eater's armor. A couple more thudded into flesh, one under the breastplate, another in the shoulder. One bolt caught it right through the face, the flight sticking out just below the eye. Any man should have dropped dead before them. The eater sprang forwards with shocking speed. One of the knights raised his flatbow in a feeble attempt to defend himself. The spear split it in two and sliced him cleanly in half at the belly, chopped into another man with an echoing clang, and sent him tumbling through the air into a tree 10 strides away. Fragments of dented armor and splintered wood flew. The first knight made a strange whistling sound as his top half tumbled to the path, showering his dumbstruck comrades with gore. Jezal was jostled back, could see nothing more than flashes of movement between his bodyguards. He heard screams and groans, clashing metal, saw swords glinting, gouts of blood flying. An armored body flew into the air, flopping like a rag doll, crunched into a wall on the other side of the gardens. The bodies swayed apart. The eater was surrounded, swinging its spear in blinding circles. One ripped into a man's shoulder and knocked him shrieking to the ground, the shaft splintering with the force of the blow and the blade spinning away edge first into the turf. A knight charged in from behind and spitted the eater through the back, the glittering point of his halberd sliding bloodless through the white armor on its chest. Another knight struck its arm off with an axe, and dust showered from the stump. The eater screeched, hit him across the chest with a backhanded blow that crushed his breastplate and drove him sighing into the dirt. A sword cut squealed through the white armor, sending dust flying up as if from a beaten carpet. Jezal stared dumbly as the eater reeled towards him. Gorst shoved him out of the way, growling as he brought his long steel round to hack deep into the eater's neck with a meaty thud. It flailed, silently, its head hanging off by a flap of gristle-brown dust pouring from its yawning wounds. It clutched at Gorst with its remaining hand, and he staggered, face twisted with pain, sank to his knees as it wrenched his arm around. "Here's heaven, bastard!" Jezal's sword chopped through the last bit of neck, and the eater's head dropped onto the grass. It let go of Gorst, and he clutched at his mangled forearm. The shape of the eater's hand dented into his heavy armor. The headless body slowly toppled over. "Cursed thing!" Jezal took one step and kicked its head across the garden, watched it bounce and roll into a flower bed, leaving a trail of dust through the grass. 3 men stood over the body, their heavy breath echoing from inside their helmets, their swords flashing in the sun as they hacked it into pieces. Its fingers were still twitching. "They're made of dust," someone whispered. Morovia frowned at the remains. "Some are, some bleed. Each one is different. We should get inside the palace," he shouted as he hurried across the gardens. "There will be more of them." "More?" 12 knights of the body lay dead. Jezal swallowed as he counted their broken and bloody, dented and battered corpses. The best men the Union had to offer, scattered around the palace gardens like heaps of scrap metal among the brown leaves. "More? But how do we?" The gates shuddered. Jezal's head snapped towards them, the blind courage of the fight fading quickly and sick panic rushing in behind it. "This way!" roared Morovia, holding open a door and beckoning desperately. It was not as though there were other choices. Jezal rushed towards him, caught one gilded boot with the other 3 steps in, and went sprawling painfully on his face. There was a cracking, a tearing, a squealing of wood and metal behind. He clawed his way onto his back to see the gates torn apart in a cloud of flying timber. Broken planks spun through the air. Bent nails pinged from the pathways. Splinters settled gently across the lawns. A woman sauntered through the open gateway, the air still shimmering gently around her tall, thin body. A pale woman with long golden hair. Another walked beside her, just the same except that her left side was spattered from head to toe with red blood. 2 women, happy smiles on their beautiful, perfect, identical faces. One of them slapped a knight herald across the head as he charged up, tearing his winged helmet from his shattered skull and sending it spinning high into the air. The other turned her black, empty eyes on Jezal. He struggled up and ran, wheezing with fear, slid through the door beside Morovia, and into the shadowy hallway, lined with ancient arms and armor. Gorst and a few knights of the body tumbled through after him. Over their shoulders the one-sided battle in the gardens continued. A man raised a flatbow only to explode in a shower of blood. An armored corpse crashed into a knight just as he turned to run, sent him hurtling sideways through a window, sword spinning from his hand. Another ran towards them, arms pumping, tumbled down a few strides away, thrashing on the ground, flames spurting from the joints in his armor. "Help me!" someone wailed. "Help me!" Help Gorst slammed the heavy doors shut with his one good arm. One of his fellows dropped the thick bar into the brackets. They tore old polams from the walls, one with a tattered battle flag attached, and started wedging them in the doorway. Jezal was already backing away, cold sweat tickling at his skin under his armor, gripping tight to the hilt of his sword more for reassurance than defense. His drastically denuded entourage stumbled back with him. Gorst, Morovia, and but 5 others, their gasping, horrified breath echoing in the dim corridor, all staring towards the door. The last gate did not hold them. Jezal whispered, "Why should this one?" No one answered. "Keep your wits about you, gentlemen," said Glokta. "The door, please." The fat mercenary took his axe to the front gate of the university. Splinters flew. It wobbled at the first blow, shuddered at the second, tore open at the third. The one-eyed dwarf slithered through, a knife in either hand, closely followed by Dagoska. Sword drawn, clear came his Styrian drawl from inside. "If fusty, excellent." Glokta looked at RD. "It might be best if you stayed towards the back." She gave an exhausted nod. I was thinking the same. He limped painfully over the threshold, black-clad mercenaries pouring through the doorway behind him, the last of them dragging Goyle reluctantly by his bandaged wrists, and along the very paths I took the first time I visited this heap of dust, so many months ago, before the vote, before Dagoska, even. How lovely to be back down the dark hallway, past the dirty paintings of forgotten adepti, tortured floorboards groaning under the boots of the mercenaries. Glokta lurched out into the wide dining hall. The freak show of practicals was scattered about the dim chamber, just as it had been when he last visited. The 2 identical men from Seljuk, with their curved swords. The tall, thin one. The dark men with their axes. The vast Northman with the ruined face. And so on. A good score of them in all. Have they been sitting here all this time, I wonder, just being menacing to each other? Vitari was already up from her chair. "I thought I told you to keep away from here, cripple." "I tried. Indeed I did. But I could not banish the memory of your smile." "Oh, Shiloh!" Dagoska strolled out from the hallway, twiddling at the waxed ends of his mustache with one hand. "Sword drawn in the other? Dagoska, don't you ever die?" Vitari let a cross-shaped knife tumble from her hand, to clatter across the boards on the end of a long chain. Seems a day for men I hoped I'd seen the last of. Her practicals spread out around her, swords sliding from sheaths, axes, maces, spears scraping off the table. The mercenaries clumped into the hall, their own weapons at the ready. Glokta cleared his throat. I think it would be better for all concerned if we could discuss this like civilize. You see anyone civilize? Snarled Vitari. A fair point. A fair point. One practical sprang up on the table, making the cutlery jump. The one-handed mercenary waved his hook in the air. The two heavily armed groups edged towards each other. It looked very much as if Koska and his hired hands would be earning their pay. A merry bloodbath, I dare say, it will be, and the outcome of a bloodbath is notoriously hard to predict. All in all, I would rather not take the gamble. A shame about your children. A shame for them that there's no one civilized around. Vitari's orange eyebrows drew furiously inwards. They're far away. Oh, I'm afraid not. 2 girls and a boy? Beautiful flaming red hair, just like their mother's. Which gate would they go through? The Gurkish came from the west, so they were stopped at the east gate and taken into custody. Glokta stuck out his bottom lip. Protective custody. These are dangerous times for children to be wandering the streets, you know. Even with her mask on, Glokta could see her horror. When? She hissed. When would a loving mother send her children to safety? Why, the very day the Gurkish arrived, of course. You know that. The way her eyes widened told him that he had guessed right. Now to twist the blade. Don't worry, though. They're tucked up safe. Practical Severard is acting as nurse, but if I don't come back, you wouldn't hurt them. What is it with everyone today? Lines I want cross, people I want hurt. Glokta showed his most revolting leer. Children, hope, and prospects, and all that happy life ahead of them? I despise the little bastards. He shrugged his twisted shoulders. But perhaps you know me better. If you're keen to play dice with your children's lives, I suppose we can find out. Or we could reach an understanding, as we did in Dagoska. Shit on this, growled one of the practicals, hefting his axe and taking a step forward. And the atmosphere of violence lurches another dizzy step towards the brink. Vitari shoved out her open hand. Don't move. You've got children, so what? Means nothing to me. It'll mean nothing to Sullier. There was a flash of metal, the jingling of a chain, and the practical staggered forward, blood pouring from his open throat. Vitari's cross-shaped knife slapped back into her palm, and her eyes flicked back to Glokta. An understanding? Exactly. You stay here. We go past. You didn't see nothing, as they say in the older parts of town. You know well enough that you can't trust Salt. He left you to the dogs in Dagoska, didn't he? And he's all done anyway. The Gurkish are knocking at the door. Time we tried something new, don't you think? Vitari's mask shifted as she worked her mouth. Thinking. The eyes of her killers sparkled. The blades of their weapons glinted. Don't call a bluff, bitch. Don't you dare, all right. She gestured with her arm, and the practicals edged unhappily back, still glaring at the mercenaries across the room. Vitari nodded her spiky head towards a doorway at the end of the chamber. Down that hall, down the stairs at the end, and there's a door. A door with black iron rivets. Excellent. A few words can be more effective than a lot of blades, even in such times as these. Glokta began to hobble away, Koska and his men following. Vitari frowned after them, her eyes deadly slits. If you so much as touch my... Yes, Glokta waved his hand. My terror is boundless. There was a moment of stillness, as the remains of the gutted building settled across one side of the square of marshals. The eaters stood, as shocked as Pharaoh, a circle of amazement. Bayaz appeared to be the only one not horrified by the scale of the destruction. His harsh chuckling echoed out and bounced back from the walls. It works, he shouted. No, screamed Mammon, and 100 words came rushing forward. Closer they came, the polished blades of their beautiful weapons flashing, their hungry mouths hanging open, their white teeth gleaming. Closer yet, streaming inwards with terrible speed, shrieking out a chorus of hate that made even Pharaoh's blood turn cold. But Bayaz only laughed. Let the judgment begin, Pharaoh growled through clenched teeth, as the seed burned cold at her palm. A mighty blast of wind swept out across the square from its center, sent eaters tumbling like skittles, rolling and flailing. It shattered every window, ripped open every door, stripped the roofs of every building bare. The great inlaid gates of the Lord's Round were sucked open, then torn from their hinges, careering across the square. Tons of wood, spinning over and over like sheets of paper in a gale. They carved a crazy swath through the helpless eaters. They ripped white armored bodies apart, sending parts of limbs flying, blood and dust going up in sprays and spatters. Pharaoh's hand was shimmering, and half her forearm. She gasped quick breaths as the cold spread through her veins, out to every part of her, burning at her insides. The seed blurred and trembled as if she looked at it through fast-flowing water. The wind whipped at her eyes as white figures were flung through the air like toys, writhing in a storm of shattered glass, shredded wood, splintered stone. No more than a dozen of them kept their feet, reeling, clutching at the ground, shining hair streaming from their heads, straining desperately against the blast. One of them reached for Pharaoh, snarling into the wind. A woman, her glittering chainmail thrashing, her hands clawing at the screaming air. She edged closer and closer, a smooth, proud face stamped with contempt, like the faces of the eaters who had come for her near Dagoska, like the faces of the slavers who had stolen her life from her, like the face of Uthman ul-Dasht, who had smiled at her anger and her helplessness. Pharaoh's shriek of fury merged with the shrieking of the wind. She had not known that she could swing a sword so hard. The look of shock only just had time to form on the eater's perfect face before the curved blade sliced through her outstretched arm and took her head from her shoulders. The corpse was plucked, flopping away, dust flying from its gaping wounds. The air was full of flashing shapes. Pharaoh stood frozen as debris whirred past her. A beam crashed through a struggling eater's chest and carried it screaming away, high into the air, spitted like a locust on a skewer. Another burst suddenly apart in a cloud of blood and flesh, the remains sucked spiraling up into the trembling sky. The great eater with the beard struggled forward, lifting his huge club above his head, bellowing words no one could hear. Through the pulsing, twisting air, Pharaoh saw Bayaz raise one eyebrow at him, saw his lips make one word: burn. For a single moment, he blazed as brightly as a star. The image of him stamped white into Pharaoh's eyes. Then his blackened bones were snatched away into the storm. Only Mamun remained. He strained forwards, dragging his feet across the stone, across the iron, inch by desperate inch, towards Bayaz. One armored greave tore from his leg and flew back, spinning through the maddened air. Then a plate from his shoulder followed it. Torn cloth flapped. The skin on his snarling face began to ripple and stretch. No! One clutching, clawing arm stretched desperately out towards the first of the Magi, fingertips straining. Yes, said Bayaz, the air around his smiling face trembling like the air above the desert. The nails tore from Mamun's fingers. His outstretched arm bent back, snapped, was ripped from his shoulder. Flawless skin peeled from bone, flapping like sailcloth in a squall brown dust, flying out of his torn body like a sandstorm over the dunes. He was dashed suddenly away, crashed through a wall near the top of one of the tall buildings. Blocks were sucked from the edges of the ragged hole he left and tumbled outwards, upwards. They joined the whipping paper, thrashing rock, spinning planks, flailing corpses that reeled through the air around the edge of the square. Faster and faster, a circle of destruction that followed the iron circles on the ground. It reached now as high as the tall buildings, and now higher yet. It flayed and scoured at everything it passed, tearing up more stone, glass, wood, metal, flesh, growing darker, faster, louder, and more powerful with every moment. Over the mindless anger of the wind, Pharaoh could just hear Bayaz's voice. God smiles on results. Dogman got up and shook his sore head, dirt flying from his hair. There was blood running down his arm, red on white. Seemed as if the world hadn't ended after all. Looked like it had come close, though. Bridge and gatehouse both had disappeared. Where they'd stood there was nothing but a great heap of broken stone and a yawning chasm carved out of the walls. That, and a whole lot of dust. There was still some folk killing, but there were a lot more rolling about, choking and groaning. Staggering through the rubbish, the fight all gone out of them. Dogman knew how they felt. Someone was clambering up onto that massive junk where the moat used to be, heading towards the breach. Someone with a tangled mess of hair and a long sword in one hand. Who else but Logen, Nine Fingers? Ah, shit, cursed Dogman. He'd got some damn fool ideas all of a sudden, had Logen, but that wasn't halfway the worst of it. There was someone following him across that bridge of rubble. Shivers, axe in hand, shield on arm, and a frown on his dirty face like a man with some dark work in mind. "Ah, shit." Grim shrugged his dusty shoulders. "Best get after him. Aye." Dogman jerked his thumb at Red Hat, just getting up from the ground and shaking a pile of grit off his coat. "Get some lads together, eh?" He pointed off towards the breach with the blade of his sword. "We're going that way." Damn it, but he needed to piss just like always. Jezal backed away down the shadowy hall, hardly daring even to breathe, feeling the sweat prickle at his palms, at his neck, at the small of his back. "What are they waiting for?" someone muttered. There was a gentle creaking sound above. Jezal looked up towards the black rafters. "Did you hear a shape burst through the ceiling and hurtled down into the hallway in a white blur, flattening one of the knights of the body, her feet leaving two great dents in his breastplate, blood spraying from his visor?" She smiled up at Jezal. "Greetings from the Prophet Khalul." "The Union," roared another knight, charging forward. One moment his sword whistled towards her. The next she was on the other side of the corridor. The blade clanged harmlessly into the stone floor and the man tottered forward. She seized him under the armpit, bent her knees slightly, and flung him shrieking through the ceiling. Broken plaster rained down as she grabbed another knight round the neck and smashed his head into the wall with such force that he was left embedded in the shattered stonework, armored legs dangling. Antique swords tumbled from their brackets and clattered down into the hallway around his limp corpse. "This way!" The High Justice dragged Jezal, numb and helpless, towards a pair of gilded double doors. Gorst lifted up one heavy boot, gave them a shivering kick, and sent them flying open. They burst through into the chamber of mirrors, cleared of the many tables that had stood there on Jezal's wedding night, an empty acre of polished tiles. He ran for the far door, his slapping footfalls and his heaving, wheezing, horrified breath echoing out around the huge room. He saw himself running, distorted, in the mirrors far ahead of him, the mirrors to each side, a ludicrous sight. A clown king fleeing through his own palace, crown askew, his scarred face beaded with sweat, slack with terror and exhaustion. He skidded to a halt, almost fell over backwards in his haste to stop, Gorst nearly plowing into his back. One of the twins was sitting on the floor beside the far doorway, leaning back against the mirrored wall, reflected in it, as though she were leaning against her sister. She lifted up one languorous hand, daubed crimson with blood, and she waved. Jezal spun towards the windows. Before he could even think of running, one of them burst into the room. The other twin came tumbling through in a shower of glittering glass, rolled over and over across the polished floor, unfolded to her feet and slid to a stop. She ran one long hand through her golden hair, yawned, and smacked her lips. "Have you ever had the feeling that someone else is having all the fun?" she asked. Chapter 48. Reckonings. Red Hat had been right. There was no reason for anyone to die here. No one but the bloody 9, at least. It was high time that Bastard took his share of the blame. "Still alive," Logen whispered, "still alive." He crept around the corner of a white building and into the park. He remembered this place full of people, laughing, eating, talking. There was no laughter here now. He saw bodies scattered on the lawns. Some armored, some not. He could hear a distant roar far off battle, maybe. Nothing nearer except the hissing of the wind through the bare branches and the crunching of his own footsteps in the gravel. His skin prickled as he crept towards the high wall of the palace. The heavy doors were gone, only the twisted hinges left hanging in the archway. The gardens on the other side were full of corpses. Armored men, all dented and bloody. There was a crowd of them on the path before the gate, crushed and broken as though they'd been smashed with a giant hammer. One was sliced clean in half, the two pieces lying in a slick of dark blood. A man stood in the midst of all this. He had white armor on, speckled and dusted with red. A wind had blown up in the gardens, and his black hair flicked around his face, dark skin smooth and flawless as a baby's. He was frowning down at a body near his feet, but he looked up at Logen as he came through the gate, without hatred or fear, without happiness or sadness. Without anything much. "You are a long way from home," he said, in Northern. "You too." Logen looked into that empty face. "You an eater?" "To that crime I must confess. We're all guilty of something." Logen hefted his sword in one hand. Shall we get to it then? I came here to kill Bayaz, no one else. Logen glanced round at the ruined corpses scattered across the gardens. How's that working out for you? Once you set your mind on killing, it is hard to choose the number of the dead. That is a fact. Blood gets you nothing but more blood, my father used to tell me. A wise man. If only I'd listened. It is hard sometimes to know what is the truth. The eater lifted up his bloody right hand and frowned at it. It is fitting that a righteous man should have doubts. You tell me, can't say I know too many righteous men. I once thought I did. Now I am not sure. We must fight. Logen took a long breath. Looks that way. So be it. He came so fast, there was hardly time to lift a sword, let alone swing it. Logen threw himself out of the way but still got caught in the ribs with something: elbow, knee, shoulder. It can be hard to tell when you're flopping over and over on the grass, everything tumbling around you. He tried to get up, found that he couldn't. Raising his head an inch was almost more than he could manage. Every breath was painful. He dropped back, staring up at the white sky. Maybe he should have stayed outside the walls. Maybe he should just let the lads rest in the trees until after it was all settled. The tall shape of the eater swam into his blurry vision, black against the clouds. I am sorry for this. I will pray for you. I will pray for us both. He lifted up his armored foot. An axe chopped into his face and sent him staggering. Logen shook the light out of his head, dragged some air in. He forced himself up onto one elbow, clutching at his side. He saw a white armored fist flash down and crash onto Shiver's shield. It ripped a chunk out of the edge and knocked Shivers onto his knees. An arrow pinged off the eater's shoulder plate and he turned, one side of his head hanging bloodily open. A second shaft stuck him neatly through the neck. Grim and the Dogman stood in the archway, their bows raised. The eater went pounding towards them with huge strides, the wind of his passing tearing at the grass. "Huh?" said Grim. The eater rammed into him with an armored elbow. He crashed into a tree 10 strides away and flopped down onto the grass. The eater raised its other arm to chop at Dogman, and a carl stabbed a spear into him, carried him thrashing backwards. More Northmen charged through the gate, crowding round, screaming and shouting, hacking with axes and swords. Logen rolled over, crawled across the lawn and seized hold of his sword, tearing a wet handful of grass up with it. A carl tumbled past him, broken head covered in blood. Logen squeezed his jaws together and charged, lifting his sword in both hands. It bit into the eater's shoulder, sheared through his armor and split him open down as far as his chest, showering blood in the Dogman's face. Same time, almost, one of the carls caught him full in the side with a maul, smashed his other arm and left a great dent in his breastplate. The eater stumbled and Red Hat hacked a gash in one of his legs. He lurched to his knees, blood spilling from his wounds and running down his dented white armor, pooling on the path underneath him. He was smiling, so far as Logen could tell, with half his face hanging off. "Free," he whispered. Logen raised the Maker's blade and hacked his head from his shoulders. A wind had blown up suddenly, swirling through the stained streets, hissing out of the burned-out buildings, whipping ash and dust in West's face as he rode towards the Agriant. He had to shout over it. "How do we fare?" "The height's gone out of 'em!" bellowed Brint, his hair dragged sideways by another gust. "They're in full retreat. Seems as if they were too keen to get the Agriant surrounded and they weren't ready for us. Now they're falling over each other to get away to the west. Still some fighting around Arnold's wall, but Orso has them on the run in the 3 farms." West saw the familiar shape of the Tower of Chains over the top of a ruin, and he urged his horse towards it. "Good. If we can just clear them away from the Agriant, we'll have the best of it. Then we can." He trailed off as they rounded the corner and could see all the way to the west gate of the citadel. Or, more accurately, where the west gate had once been. It took him a moment to make sense of it. The Tower of Chains loomed up to one side of a monumental breach in the wall of the Agriant. The entire gatehouse had somehow been brought down, along with large sections of the wall to either side, the remains choking the moat below, or distributed widely around the ruined streets in front. The Gurkish were inside the Agriant. The very heart of the Union lay exposed. Not far ahead now, a formless battle was still raging before the citadel. West urged his horse closer, through the stragglers and the wounded, into the very shadow of the walls. He saw a line of kneeling flatbowmen deliver a withering volley into a crowd of Gurkish bodies toppling. Beside him, A man screamed into the wind as another tried to secure a tourniquet on the bloody stump of his leg. Pike's face was grimmer even than usual. "We should be further back, sir. This isn't safe." West ignored him. Each man had to do his part, without exception. "We need a line formed up here. Where is General Croy?" The sergeant was no longer listening. His eyes had drifted upwards, his mouth dropping stupidly open. West turned around in his saddle. A black column was rising above the western end of the citadel. It seemed at first to be made of swirling smoke, but as West gained some sense of scale, he realized it was spinning matter. Masses of it. Masses of it. Countless tons of it. His eyes followed it upwards, higher and higher. The clouds themselves were moving, whipped round in a spiral at the center, shifting in a slow circle above them. The fighting sputtered, as Union and Gurkish alike gaped up at the writhing pillar above the Agrient, the Tower of Chains a black finger in front of it, the House of the Maker an insignificant pinprick behind. Things began to rain from the sky. Small things, at first splinters, dust, leaves, fragments of paper. Then a chunk of wood, the size of a chair leg, plummeted down and bounced spinning from the paving. A soldier squealed as a stone big as a fist smashed into his shoulder. Those who were not fighting were backing away, crouching to the ground, holding shields above their heads. The wind was growing more savage, clothes whipping in the storm, men stumbling against it, leaning into it, teeth gritted and eyes narrowed. The spinning pillar was growing wider, darker, faster, higher, touching the very sky. West could see specks around its edge dancing against the white clouds like swarms of midges on a summer's day, except that these were tumbling blocks of stone, wood, earth, metal, by some freak of nature sucked into the heavens and set flying. He did not know what was happening or how. All he could do was stare. "Sir, we must go." He seized hold of West's bridle. A great chunk of masonry crashed into the paving not far from them. West's horse reared up, screaming in panic. The world lurched, spun, was black. He was not sure how long for. He was on his face, mouth full of grit. He raised his head, wobbled drunkenly up to his hands and knees, wind roaring in his ears, flying grit stinging at his face. It was dark as dusk. The air was full of tumbling rubbish. It ripped at the ground, at the buildings, at the men huddled now like sheep, all thoughts of battle long forgotten. The living sprawled on their faces with the dead. The Tower of Chains was scoured by debris, the slates flying from its rafters. Then the rafters torn away into the storm. A giant beam plummeted down and crashed into the cobbles, spun end over end, flinging corpses out of its path to slice through the wall of a house and send its roof sliding inwards. West trembled, tears snatched away from his stinging eyes, utterly helpless. Was this how the end would come? Not covered in blood and glory at the head of a fool's charge like General Polder, not passing quietly in the night like Marshal Burr, not even hooded on the scaffold for the murder of Crown Prince Ladisla, crushed at random by a giant piece of rubbish falling from the sky. "Forgive me," he whispered into the tempest. He saw the black outline of the Tower of Chains shifting. He saw it lean outwards. Chunks of stone rained down, splashed into the churning moat. The whole vast edifice lurched, bulged, and toppled outwards, with ludicrous slowness, through the flailing storm and into the city. It broke into monstrous sections as it fell, crashing down upon the houses, crushing cowering men like ants, throwing deadly missiles in every direction. And that was all. There were no buildings now, around the space that had once been the Square of Marshals. The gushing fountains, the stately statues in the Kingsway, the palaces full of soft pinks, all snatched away. The gilded dome had lifted from the Lord's round, cracked, split, and been ripped into chaff. The high wall of the halls marshal was a ravaged ruin. The rest of the proud buildings were nothing more than shattered stumps, torn down to their very foundations. They had all melted away before Pharaoh's watering eyes, dissolved into the formless mass of fury that whirled shrieking around the first of the Magi, endlessly hungry from the ground to the very heavens. Yes, she could hear his delighted laughter over the noise of the storm. "I am greater than Juvens. I am greater than Uz himself." Was this vengeance? Then how much of it would make her whole? Pharaoh wondered dumbly how many people had been cowering in those vanished buildings. The shimmering around the seed was swelling, up to her shoulder, then to her neck, and it engulfed her. The world grew quiet. Far away the destruction continued, but it was blurred now. The sounds of it came to her muffled, as if through water. Her hand was beyond cold. She was numb to the shoulder. She saw Bayaz, smiling, his arms raised. The wind ripped about them, a wall of endless movement. But there were shapes within it. They grew sharper even as the rest of the world grew less distinct. They gathered around the outside of the outermost circle. Shadows. Ghosts. A hungry crowd of them. Pharaoh came their whispering voices. A storm had blown up sudden in the gardens, more sudden even than the storms in the high places. The light had faded, then stuff had started tumbling down from the dark sky. Dogman didn't know where it was coming from, and he didn't much care. He had other things more pressing to worry on. They dragged the wounded in through a high doorway, groaning, cursing, or worst of all, saying nothing. A couple they left outside, back to the mud already. No point wasting breath on them who were far past helping. Logen had Grim under his armpits. The Dogman had him by the boots. His face was white as chalk but for the red blood on his lips. You could see it plain on his face that it was bad, but he didn't complain any, not Harding Grim. Dogman wouldn't have believed it if he had. They set him down on the floor, in the gloom on the other side of the door. Dogman could hear things rattling against the windows, thumping against the turf outside, clattering on the roofs above. More men were carried in broken arms and broken legs, and worse besides. Shivers came after, bloody axe in one hand and his shield arm dangling useless. Dogman had never seen a hallway like it. The floor was made of green stone and white stone, polished up smooth and shining bright as glass. The walls were hung with great paintings. The ceiling was crusted with flowers and leaves, carved so fine they looked almost real, except that they were made from gold, glittering in the dim light leaking through the windows. Men bent down, tending to fellows injured, giving them water and soft words, a splint or two being fixed. Logen and Shivers just stood there, giving each other a look. Not hatred exactly, and not respect. It was hard for the Dogman to say what it was, and he didn't much care about that either. "What were you thinking?" he snapped. "Pissing off on your own like that. Thought you were supposed to be chief now. That's a poor effort, ain't it?" Logen only stared back, eyes gleaming in the gloom. "Got to help Pharaoh," he muttered, half to himself. "Jezal too." Dogman stared at him. "Got to help who? There's real folk here in need o' help. I ain't much with the wounded. Only one then, bloody nine. If you must. Get to it." Dogman saw Logen's face flinch when he heard that name. He backed away, one hand clamped to his side and his sword gripped bloody in the other. Then he turned and limped off down the glittering hallway. "Hurts," said Grim as Dogman squatted down next to him. "Where?" He gave a bloody smile. "Everywhere." "Right. Well," Dogman pulled his shirt up. One side of his chest was caved in, a great blue-black bruise spread out all across it like a tar stain. He could hardly believe a man could still be breathing with a wound like that. "Ah," he muttered, not having a clue where to start even. "I think I'm done." "What? This?" Dogman tried to grin but didn't have it in him. "No more than a scratch." "Scratch, eh?" Grim tried to lift his head, winced and fell back, breathing shallow. He stared up, eyes wide open. "That's a fucking beautiful ceiling." The Dogman swallowed. I reckon. Should have died fighting Nine Fingers, long time ago. The rest was all a gift. Grateful for it, though, Dogman. I've always loved our talks." He closed his eyes, and he stopped breathing. He'd never said much. Harding Grim, famous for it. Now he'd stay silent forever. A pointless sort of a death, a long way from home. Not for anything he'd believed in, or understood, or stood to gain from. Nothing more'n a waste. But then Dogman had seen a lot of men go back to the mud, and there was never anything fine about it. He took a long breath and stared down at the floor. A single lamp cast creeping shadows across the moldering hallway, over rough stone and flaking plaster. It made sinister outlines of the mercenaries, turned Casca's face and Ardy's into unfamiliar masks. The darkness seemed to gather inside the heavy stonework of the archway and around the door with an ancient-looking, knotted and grained, studded with black iron rivets. Something amusing, superior. "I stood here," murmured Glokta, "in this exact spot. With silver." He reached out and brushed the iron handle with his fingertips. My hand was on the latch and I moved on. Ah, the irony. The answers we seek so long and far for so often at our fingertips all along. Glokta felt a shiver down his twisted spine as he leaned close to the door. He could hear something from beyond, a muffled droning in a language he did not recognize. The Adeptus demonic calls upon the denizens of the abyss. He licked his lips. The image of High Justice Moravia's frozen remains fresh in his mind. It would be rash to plunge straight through, however keen we are to put our questions to rest. Very rash, Superior Goyle, since you have led us here. Perhaps you would care to go first. Gee, squeaked Goyle through his gag, his already bulging eyes going even wider. Casca took the Superior of Adua by his collar, seized the iron handle with his other hand, thrust it swiftly open, and applied his boot to the seat of Goyle's trousers. He stumbled through, bellowing meaningless nonsense into his gag. The metallic sound of a flatbow being discharged issued from the other side of the door, along with the chanting louder and harsher now by far. What would Colonel Glokta have said? Onwards to victory, lads. Glokta lurched through the doorway, almost tripping over his own aching foot on the threshold, and gazed about him in surprise. A large, circular hall with a domed ceiling, its shadowy walls painted with a vast, exquisitely detailed mural, and one that seems uncomfortably familiar. Canidius, the master maker, loomed up over the chamber with arms outspread, 5 times life-size or more, fire blazing from behind him in vivid crimson, orange, white. On the opposite wall lay his brother Juvens, stretched out on the grass beneath flowering trees, blood running from his many wounds. In between the 2 men, the Magi marched to take their revenge. 6 on one side, 5 on the other, bold Bayaz in the lead. Blood, fire, death, vengeance. How wonderfully appropriate given the circumstances. An intricate design had been laid out with obsessive care, covering the wide floor. Circles within circles, shapes, symbols, figures of frightening complexity, all described in neat lines of white powder. Salt, unless I am much mistaken. Goyle lay on his chest a stride or 2 from the door, at the edge of the outermost ring, his hands still tied behind him. Dark blood spread out from under him, the point of a flatbow bolt sticking out of his back, just where his heart should be. I would never have taken that for his weak spot. 4 of the university's adepti stood in various stages of amazement. 3 of them, Chael, Denka, and Kandalau, held candles in both hands, their sputtering wicks giving off a choking corpse stink. Sorazin, the Adeptus chemical, clutched an empty flatbow. The faces of the old men, lit in bilious yellow from beneath, were pantomime masks of fear. At the far side of the room, Silber stood behind a lectern, a great book open before him, staring down with intense concentration by the light of a single lamp. His finger hissed across the page, his thin lips moving ceaselessly. Even at this distance, and despite the fact the room was icy cold, Glokta could see fat beads of sweat running down his thin face. Beside him, painfully upright in his pure white coat and glaring blue daggers across the width of the chamber, stood Arch-Lector Salt. "Glokta, you crippled bastard!" he snarled. "What the hell are you doing here?" "I could well ask you the same question, Your Eminence." He waved his cane at the scene. Except the candles, the ancient books, the chanting, and the circles of salt rather give the game away, no? And a rather infantile game it seems, suddenly. All that time, while I was torturing my way through the Mercers, while I was risking my life in Dagoska, while I was blackmailing votes in your name, you were up to this. But Salt seemed to be taking it seriously enough. "Get out, you fool!" "This is our last chance." "This? Seriously?" Casca was already through the door, masked mercenaries following. Silber's eyes were still fixed on the book, lips still moving, more sweat on his face than ever. Glokta frowned. "Someone shut him up." "No," shouted Chael, a look of utter horror on his tiny face. "You mustn't stop the incantations. It is a profoundly dangerous operation. The consequences could be disastrous," shrieked Kandalau. One of the mercenaries took a step towards the middle of the room nonetheless. "Don't tread near the salt!" screeched Denka, wax dripping from his wobbling candle. "Whatever you do, wait," snapped Glokta. and the man paused at the edge of the circle, peering at him over his mask. The room was growing colder even as they spoke. Unnaturally cold. Something was happening in the center of the circles. The air was trembling, like the air above a bonfire, more and more as Silber's harsh voice droned on. Glokta stood frozen, his eyes flicking between the old adepti. What to do? Stop him! Or don't stop him! Stop him, or allow me! Koska stepped forwards, delving into his black coat with his spare left hand. But you can't be. He whipped his arm out with a careless flourish, and his throwing knife came with it. The blade flashed in the candlelight, spun directly through the shimmering air in the center of the room, and embedded itself to the hilt in Silber's forehead with a gentle thud. Ha ha! Koska seized Glokta by the shoulder. What did I tell you? Have you ever seen a knife thrown better? Blood ran down the side of Silber's face in a red trickle. His eyes rolled upwards, flickered. Then he sagged sideways, dragging over his lectern, and crashed to the floor. His book tumbled down on top of him, aged pages flapping. The lamp spilled over and sprayed streaks of burning oil across the floor. No, shrieked Salt. Chael gasped, his mouth falling open. Candelao threw his candle aside and sank groveling to the floor. Denka gave a terrified squeak, one hand over his face, staring out pop-eyed from between his fingers. There was a long pause while everyone except Koska stared, horrified, towards the corpse of the Adeptus Demonic. Glokta waited, his few teeth bared, his eyes almost squeezed shut, like that horrible, beautiful moment between stubbing your toe and feeling the hurt. Here it comes, here it comes, here comes the pain, but nothing came. No demonic laughter echoed through the chamber. The floor did not fall in to expose a gate to hell. The shimmering faded. The room began to grow warmer. Glokta raised his brows, almost disappointed. It would seem the diabolical arts are decidedly overrated. No, snarled Salt again. I'm afraid so, Your Eminence. And to think I used to respect you. Glokta grinned at the Adeptus Chemical, still clinging weakly to his empty flatbow. He waved a hand at Goyle's body. A good shot. I congratulate you. One less mess for me to tidy up. He waved a finger at the crowd of mercenaries behind him. Now seize that man. No, bellowed Sarazen, throwing his flat bow to the floor. None of it was my idea. I had no choice. It was him. He stabbed a thick finger at Silber's lifeless body. And him, he pointed to Salt with a trembling arm. You've got the right idea, but it can wait for the interrogation. Would you be kind enough to take His Eminence into custody? Happily. Koska strolled across the floor of the wide room, his boots sending up puffs of white powder, leaving a trail of ruination through the intricate patterns. Glokta! You blundering idiot! Shrieked Salt. You have no idea of the danger Bayaz poses. This first of the Magi and his bastard king, Glokta. You have no right. Ka! He yelped as Koska dragged his arms behind his back and forced him to his knees, his white hair in disarray. You have no idea. If the Gurkish don't kill the lot of us, you'll get ample time to explain it to me. Of that I assure you. Glokta leered his toothless smile as Koska drew the rope tight around Salt's wrists. If you only knew how long I have dreamed of saying these words. Archlector Salt, I arrest you for high treason against His Majesty the King. Jezal could only stand and stare. One of the twins, the one spattered in blood, lifted her long arms slowly over her head and gave a long, satisfied stretch. The other raised an eyebrow. How would you like to die? She asked. Your Majesty, get behind me. Gorst hefted his long steel in his one good hand. Not this time. Jezal pulled the crown from his head, the crown that Bayaz had been so particular in designing, and tossed it clattering away. He was done with being a king. If he was to die, he would die a man like any other. He had been given so many advantages, he realized now, far more than most men could ever dream of. So many chances to do good, and he had done nothing besides whine and think of himself. Now it was too late. I've lived my life leaning on others, hiding behind them, climbing on their shoulders. Not this time. One of the twins raised her hands and started slowly to clap, the regular tap-tap echoing from the mirrors. The other giggled. Gorst raised his sword. Jezal did the same. One last act of pointless defiance. Then High Justice Morovia flashed between them. The old man moved with impossible speed, his dark robe snapping around him. He had something in his hand, a a long rod of dark metal with a hook on the end. "What?" muttered Jezal. The hook blazed suddenly, searingly white, bright as the sun on a summer's day. 100 hooks burned like stars, reflected back from the mirrors round the walls, and back, into the far distance. Jezal gasped, squeezed his eyes shut, holding one hand over his face. The long trail left by that brilliant point burned fizzing into his vision. He blinked, gaped, lowered his arm. The twins stood, the High Justice beside them, just where they had before, still as statues. Tendrils of white steam hissed up from vents in the end of the strange weapon and curled around Morovia's arm. For a moment, nothing moved. Then a dozen of the great mirrors at the far end of the hall fell in half across the middle, as though they were sheets of paper slashed suddenly by the world's sharpest knife. A couple of the bottom halves and one of the top toppled slowly forwards into the room and shattered, scattering bright fragments of glass across the tiled floor. "Urg," breathed the twin on the left. Jezal realized that blood was spurting out from under her armor. She lifted one hand towards him, and it dropped off the end of her arm and thudded to the tiles, blood squirting from the smoothly severed stump. She toppled to the left, or her body did at least. Her legs fell the other way. The bigger part of her crashed to the ground, and her head came off and rolled across the tiles in a widening pool. Her hair, trimmed off cleanly at the neck, fluttered down into the bloody mess in a golden cloud. Armor, flesh, bone, all divided into neat sections as perfectly as cheese by a cheese wire. The twin on the right frowned, took a wobbling step towards Morovia. Her knees gave out and she fell in half at the waist. The legs slumped down and lay still, dust sliding out in a brown heap. The top half dragged itself forward by the nails, lifted its head, hissing. The air around the High Justice shimmered, and the eater's severed body burst into flames. It thrashed for a while, making a long, squealing sound. Then it was still, a mass of smoking black ash. Morovia lifted up the strange weapon, whistling softly as he smiled at the hook on the end, a last few traces of vapor still drifting from it. Canedius, he certainly knew how to make a weapon. The master maker indeed, your majesty? What? Muttered Jezal, utterly dumbfounded. Morovia's face melted slowly away as he crossed the floor towards them. Another began to show itself beneath. Only his eyes remained the same. Different colored eyes, happy lines around the corners, grinning at Jezal like an old friend. Yoruzulfur bowed. Never any peace, your majesty? Never the slightest peace. There was a crash as one of the doors burst open. Jezal raised his sword hard in his mouth. Sulphur whipped round, the maker's weapon held down by his side. A man stumbled into the room. A big man, his grimacing face covered in scars, his chest heaving, a heavy sword hanging from one hand, the other clutched to his ribs. Jezal blinked, hardly able to believe it. Logen 9 Fingers. How the hell did you get here? The Northman stared for a moment. Then he leaned back against a mirror by the door, let his sword drop to the tiles. He slid down, slowly, until he hit the floor, and sat there with his head leaning back against the glass. Long story, he said. Listen to us. The wind was full of shapes now, hundreds of them. They crowded in around the outermost circle. The bright iron turned misty, gleaming with cold wet. We have things to tell you, Pharaoh, secrets. What can we give you? We know everything. We know everything. You need only let us in. So many voices. She heard Aruf among them, her old teacher. She heard Sussman the slaver. She heard her mother and her father. She heard Yulway and Prince Uthman. 100 voices, 1,000. Voices she knew and had forgotten. Voices of the dead and of the living. Shouts, mutters, screams, whispers in her ear. Closer still, closer than her own thoughts. You want vengeance? We can give you vengeance, like nothing you have dreamed of. All you want. All you want. All you need. Only let us in, that empty space in you. We are what is missing. The metal rings had turned white with frost. Pharaoh kneeled at one end of a dizzying tunnel, its walls made from rushing, roaring, furious matter, full of shadows. its end far beyond the dark sky. The laughter of the first of the Magi echoed faintly in her ears. The air hummed with power, twisted, shimmered, blurred. "You need do nothing, Bayaz. He will do it. Fool! Liar! Let us in. Cannot understand. He uses you. He laughs, but not for long. The gates strain. Let us in." If Bayaz heard the voices, he gave no sign. Cracks ran through the quivering paving, branching out from his feet, splinters floating up around him in whirling spirals. The iron rings began to shift, to buckle. With a grinding of tortured metal, they twisted out from the crumbling stones, bright edges shining. The seals break. 11 wards, and 11 wards, and 11 wards. "The doors open!" "Yes," came the voices, speaking together. The shadows crowded in closer. Pharaoh's breath came short and fast. Her teeth rattled. Her limbs trembled. The cold was on her very heart. She knelt at a precipice, bottomless, limitless, full of shadows, full of voices. "Soon we will be with you. Very soon. The time is upon us." Both sides of the divide joined, as they were meant to be. Before Uz spoke his first law. "Let us in." She needed only to cling to the seed a moment longer. Then the voices would give her vengeance. Bayaz was a liar. She had known it from the start. She owed him nothing. Her eyelids flickered, closed, her mouth hung open. The noise of the wind grew fainter yet, until she could hear only the voices, whispering, soothing, righteous. "We will take the world and make it right together. Let us in. You will help us. You will free us. You can trust us. Trust us, trust." A word that only liars used. Pharaoh remembered the wreckage of Alcus, the hollow ruins, the blasted mud. The creatures of the other side are made of lies. Better to have an empty space in her than to fill it with this. She wedged her tongue between her teeth and bit down hard, felt her mouth fill up with salty blood. She sucked in breath, forced her eyes open. Not for Bayaz, not for the tellers of secrets. She would find her own path. A dark one, perhaps, but her own. The lid swung open. "No." The voices hissed together in her ear. "No." Pharaoh ground her bloody teeth, growled with fury as she forced her fingers to unclench. The world was a melting, screaming, formless mass of darkness. Gradually, her dead hand came open. Here was her revenge. Against the liars, the users, the thieves. The earth shook, crumbled, tore as thin and fragile as a sheet of glass, and with an empty void beneath it. She turned her trembling hand, and the seed dropped from her palm. All as one, the voices screamed their harsh command. "No!" She blindly seized hold of the lid. "Fuck yourselves," she hissed. And with her last grain of strength she forced the box closed. Chapter 49. After the Rains. Logen leaned on the parapet, high up on a tower at one side of the palace, and frowned into the wind. He'd done the same. It felt an age ago now. From the top of the Tower of Chains, he'd stared out dumbstruck at the endless city, wondering if he could ever have dreamed of a man-made thing so proud, and beautiful, and indestructible as the Agrient. By the dead, how times change. The green space of the park was scattered with fallen rubbish, trees broken, grass gouged, half the lake leaked away and sunk into a muddy bog. At its western edge a sweep of fine white buildings still stood, even if the windows gaped empty. Further west, and they had no roofs, bare rafters hanging. Further still, their walls were torn and scoured, empty shells, choked with rubble. Beyond that, there was nothing. The great hall with the golden dome, gone. The square where Logen had watched the sword game, gone. The Tower of Chains, the mighty wall under it, and all the grand buildings over which Logen had fled with Pharaoh. All gone. A colossal circle of destruction was carved from the western end of the Agrient, and only acres of formless wreckage remained. The city beyond was torn with black scars, smoke still rising from a few last fires, from smoldering hulks still drifting in the bay. The house of the Maker loomed over the scene, a sharp black mass under the brooding clouds, uncaring and untouched. Logen stood there, scratching at the scarred side of his face, over and over. His wounds ached, so many of them. Every part of him was battered and bruised, slashed and torn, from the fight with the Eater, from the battle beyond the moat, from the duel with the feared, from 7 days of slaughter in the high places, from 100 fights and skirmishes and old campaigns, too many to remember. So tired and sore and sick, he frowned down at his hands on the parapet in front of him. The bare stone looked back where his middle finger used to be. He was 9 fingers still, the bloody 9. A man made of death, just as Bethod had said. He'd nearly killed the Dogman yesterday, he knew it. His oldest friend, his only friend. He'd raised the sword, and if it wasn't for a trick of fate, he would have done it. He remembered standing high up, on the side of the great northern library, looking out over the empty valley, the still lake like a great mirror beneath it. He remembered feeling the wind on his fresh-shaved jaw and wondering whether a man could change. Now he knew the answer. Master Nine Fingers, Logen turned quickly, hissed through his teeth as the stitches down his side burned. The first of the Magi stepped through the doorway and out into the open air. He was changed, somehow. He looked young. Younger even than when Logen first met him. There was a sharpness to his movements, a gleam in his eye. It even seemed that there were a few dark hairs in the gray beard round his friendly grin, the first smile Logen had seen in a good while. "You are hurt?" he asked. Logen sucked sourly at his teeth. Hardly the first time, and yet it gets no easier. Bayaz placed his meaty fists on the stone next to Logen's and stared out happily at the view. Just as if it was a field of flowers instead of a sweep of epic ruin. "I hardly expected to see you again so soon, and to see you so very far advanced. I understand that your feud is over. You defeated Bethod, threw him from his own walls, the way I heard it. A nice touch. Always thinking of the song they will sing, eh? And then you took his place. The Bloody 9, King of the Northmen. Imagine that." Logen frowned. "That wasn't how it happened. Details. The result is the same, is it not? Peace in the north at last? Either way, I congratulate you." "Bethod had a few things to say, did he?" asked Bayaz carelessly. "I always found his conversation rather drab. All about himself, his plans, his achievements. It is so very tiresome when men think never of others." "Poor Manas," he said. "You're the reason why he didn't kill me. That you bargained for my life. True, I must confess. He owed me. And you were the price I demanded. I like to keep one eye on the future. Even then, I knew I might have need of a man who could speak to the spirits. It was an unexpected bonus that you turned out to be such a winning traveling companion." Logen found he was talking through gritted teeth. "Would have been nice to know is all. You never asked, Master Nanyfingers. You did not want to know my plans, as I recall, and I did not want to make you feel indebted. I saved your life once would have been a poor start to our friendship. All reasonable enough, like everything Bayaz ever said, but it left a sour taste still, to have been traded like a hog. Where's Quay? I'd like to dead." Bayaz pronounced the word smartly, sharp as a knife thrust. "We feel his loss most keenly. Back to the mud, eh?" Logen remembered the effort he'd made to save that man's life. The miles had slogged through the rain trying to do the right thing. All wasted. Perhaps he should have felt more. But it was hard with so much death spread out in front of him. Logen was numb now. Either that, or he really didn't care a shit. It was hard to say which. "Back to the mud," he muttered again. "You carry on, though, don't you? Of course, that's the task that comes with surviving. You remember them. You say some words, then you carry on, and hope for better." "Indeed. You have to be realistic about these things." "True." Logen worked at his sore side with one hand, trying to make himself feel something. But a scrap of extra pain helped no one. "I lost a friend yesterday. It was a bloody day. It was a bloody day. But a victorious one. Oh, aye. For who?" He could see people moving among the ruins, insects picking at the rubble, searching for survivors and finding the dead. He doubted many of them were feeling the flush of victory right now. He knew he wasn't. "I should be with my own kind," he muttered, but without moving. "Helping with the burying, helping with the wounded, and yet you are here, looking down. Bayaz's green eyes were hard as stones, that hardness that Logen had noticed from the very start, and had somehow forgotten, somehow grown to overlook. I entirely understand your feelings. Healing is for the young. As one gets older, one finds one has less and less patience with the wounded. He raised his eyebrows as he turned back towards the horrible view. I am very old. He lifted his fist to knock, then paused, fingers rubbing nervously against his palm. He remembered the sour, sweet smell of her, the strength of her hands, the shape of her frown in the firelight. He remembered the warmth of her, pressed up close to him in the night. He knew there had been something good between them, even if all the words they had said had been hard. Some people don't have soft words in them, however much they try. He didn't hold much hope, of course. A man like him was better off without it. But you get nothing out if you put nothing in. So Logen gritted his teeth and knocked. No reply. He chewed at his lip and knocked again. Nothing. He frowned, twitchy and suddenly out of patience, wrenched the knob round and shoved the door open. Pharaoh spun about. Her clothes were rumpled and dirty, even more than usual. Her eyes were wide, wild, even her fists clenched. But her face quickly fell when she saw it was him, and his heart sank with it. It's me, Logen. She grunted. She jerked her head sideways, frowning at the window. She took a couple of steps towards it, eyes narrowed. Then she snapped round suddenly the other way. There! What? Muttered Logen, baffled. Do you not hear them? Hear what? Them idiot. She crept over to one wall and pressed herself up against it. Logen hadn't been sure how it would go. He could never be sure of anything with her, he knew that. But he hadn't been expecting this. Just plow ahead, he reckoned. What else could he do? I'm a king now. He snorted. King of the Northmen? Would you believe it? He was thinking she'd laugh in his face, but she just stood, listening to the wall. Me and Luther, both. A pair of kings. Can you think of two more worthless bastards to put crowns on, eh? No answer. Logen licked his lips. No choice but to get straight to it, maybe. Pharaoh, the way things turned out, the way we left it. He took a step towards her, and another. I wish I hadn't, I don't know. He put one hand on her shoulder. Pharaoh, I'm trying to tell you. She turned quickly, plastered her hand over his mouth. Shh. She grabbed his shirt and pulled him down onto his knees. She pressed her ear against the tiles, eyes moving back and forward, as if she was listening for something. Do you hear that? She let go of him and pushed herself into the corner. There! Do you hear them? He reached out, slowly, and touched the back of her neck, ran his rough fingertips over her skin. She shook him off with a jerk of her shoulders, and he felt his face twist. Perhaps that good thing between them had been only in his mind, and never in hers. Perhaps he had wanted it so badly that he had let himself imagine it. He stood up, cleared his dry throat. Never mind. I'll come back later, maybe. She was still on her knees, her head against the floor. She did not even watch him leave. Logen Ninafingers was no stranger to death. He'd walked among it all his days. He'd watched the bodies burned by the score after the battle at Carlion. Long ago, he'd seen them buried by the hundreds up in the nameless valley in the high places. He'd walked on a hill of men's bones under ruined Alcus, but even the bloody Nine, even the most feared man in the north, had never looked on anything like this. Bodies were stacked beside the wide avenue in heaps, chest high. Sagging mounds of corpses, on and on. Hundreds upon hundreds, too many for him to guess at the numbers. Someone had made an effort at covering them. But not that great an effort. The dead give no thanks for it, after all. Ragged sheets flapped in the breeze, weighted down with broken wood, limp hands and feet hanging out from underneath. At this end of the road a few statues still stood. Once proud kings and their advisers, stone faces and bodies scarred and pitted, stared sadly down at the bloody waste heaped round their feet. Enough of them for Logen to recognize that this truly was the king's way, and that he hadn't somehow stumbled into the land of the dead. 100 strides further, and there were only empty plinths, one with broken legs still attached. A strange group were clustered around them, withered-looking, somewhere between dead and alive. A man sat on a block of stone, staring numbly as he pulled handfuls of hair out of his head. Another was coughing into a bloody rag. A woman and a man lay side by side, gawping at nothing, faces shriveled to little more than skulls. Her breath came crackling short and fast. His did not come at all. Another 100 strides, and it was as if Logen walked through some ruined hell. There was no sign that statues, buildings, or anything else had ever stood there. In their place were only tangled hills of strange rubbish, broken stone, splintered wood, twisted metal, paper, glass, all crushed together and bound up with tons of dust and mud. Things stuck from the wreckage, strangely intact: a door, a chair, a carpet, a painted plate, the smiling face of a statue. Men and women struggled everywhere among this chaos, streaked with dirt, picking at the rubbish, throwing it down to the road, trying to clear paths through it. Rescuers, workmen, thieves, who knew? Logen passed by a crackling bonfire high as a man, felt the kiss of its heat on his cheek. A big soldier in armor stained with black soot stood beside it. "You find anything in white metal?" He was roaring at the searchers. "It goes in the fire. Flesh in white metal. Burn it. Orders of the closed council." A few strides further on, someone was on top of one of the highest mounds, straining at a great length of wood. He turned round to get a better grip. None other than Jezal Dan Luther. His clothes were torn and grubby. His face was smudged with mud. He barely looked any more like a king than Logen did. A thick-set man stood staring up, one arm in a sling. "Your Majesty, this is not safe," he piped in an oddly girlish voice. "We really should be. No, this is where I'm needed." Jezal bent back over the beam, straining at it, veins bulging from his neck. There was no way he was going to get it shifted on his own, but still he tried. Logen stood watching him. "How long's he been like this?" "All night and all day," said the thick-set man. "And no sign of stopping. Those few we found alive, nearly all of them have this sickness." He waved his good arm towards the pitiful group beside the statues. "Their hair falls out, their nails, their teeth. They wither. Some have died already. Others are well on the way." He slowly shook his head. "What crime did we commit to deserve this punishment? Punishment doesn't always come to the guilty." "Nine fingers!" Jezal was looking down, the watery sun behind him. "There's a strong back. Grab the end of that beam there." It was hard to see what good shifting a beam might do in all of this, but great journeys start with small steps. Logen's father had always told him. So he clambered up, wood cracking and stones sliding underneath his boots, hauled himself to the top and stood there, staring. By the dead. From where he was standing, the hills of wreckage seemed to go on forever. People crawled over them, dragging frantically at the rubble, sorting carefully through it, or simply standing like him, stunned by the scale of it. A circle of utter waste, a mile across or more. "Help me, Logen." "Aye, right." He bent down and dug his hands under one end of the great length of scarred wood. Two kings dragging at a beam. The kings of mud. "Pull then." Logen heaved, his stitches burning. Gradually he felt the wood shift. "Yes," grunted Jezal through gritted teeth. Together they lifted it, hauled it to one side. Jezal reached down and dragged away a dry tree branch, tore back a ripped sheet. A woman lay beneath, staring sideways. One broken arm was wrapped around a child, curly hair dark with blood. "All right." Jezal wiped slowly at his mouth with the back of one dirty hand. "All right. Well, we'll put them with the rest of the dead." He clambered further over the wreckage. "You, bring that crowbar up here. Up here and a pick. We need to clear this stone. Stack it there. We'll need it, later, to rebuild." Logen put a hand on his shoulder. "Jezal, wait, you know me." "Me? Of course. I like to think so. All right. Tell me something then. Am I—" He struggled to find the right words. "Am I an evil man? You?" Jezal stared at him, confused. "You're the best man I know." They were gathered under a broken tree in the park, a shadowy crowd of them. Black outlines of men, standing calm and still, red clouds and golden spread out above, around the setting sun. Logen could hear their slow voices as he walked up. Words for the dead, soft and sad. He could see the graves at their feet. 24 piles of fresh-turned earth, set out in a circle so each man was equal. The great leveler, just as the hillmen say. Men put in the mud, and men saying words, could have been a scene out of the Old North, long ago in the time of Scarling Hoodless. Harding Grim! I never saw a better man with a bow. Not ever. Can't count the number of times he saved my life, and never expected thanks for it, except maybe that I'd do the same for him. Guess I couldn't, this time. Guess none of us could. The Dogman's voice trailed off. A few heads turned to look at Logen as his footsteps crunched in the gravel. If it ain't the king of the Northmen, someone said, the bloody nine hisself, we should bow, shouldn't we? They were all looking at him now. He could see their eyes gleaming in the dusk. Nothing more than shaggy outlines, hard to tell one man from another. A crowd of shadows, a crowd of ghosts, and just as unfriendly. You got something you want to say, bloody nine? Came a voice from near the back. I don't reckon, he said. You're doing all right. Was no reason for us to be here. A few mumbles of agreement. Not our bloody fight. No need for them to have died, more mutters. Should be you were burying. Aye, maybe. Logen would have liked to weep at that. But instead he felt himself smiling. The bloody nine's smile. That grin that skulls have with nothing inside but death. Maybe. But you don't get to pick who dies. Not unless you've got the bones to put your own hand to it. Have you? Have any of you? Silence. Well then, good for Harding Grim. Good for the rest of the dead. They'll all be missed. Logen spat onto the grass. Shit on the rest of you. And he turned and walked back the way he came, into the darkness. Chapter 50. Answers. So much to do. The house of questions still stood, and someone had to take the reins. Who else will do it? Superior Goyle. A flatbow bolt through the heart prevents him, alas. Someone had to look to the internment and questioning of the many hundreds of Gurkish prisoners. More captured every day as the army drove the invaders back to Keln. Left the Union forever with her children in tow. Someone had to examine the treason of Lord Brock, to dig him up, and root out his accomplices, to make arrests and obtain confessions. And who else is there now? Arch-Lector Sult. Oh dear me, no. Glokta wheezed up to his door, his few teeth bared at the endless pains in his legs. A fortunate decision, at least, to move to the eastern side of the Agrient. One should be grateful for the small things in life, like a place to rest one's crippled husk. My old lodgings are no doubt languishing under 1,000 tons of rubble. Just like the rest of his door was not quite shut. He gave it the gentlest of pushes, and it creaked open, soft lamplight spilling out into the corridor. A glowing stripe over the dusty floorboards, over the foot of Glokta's cane and the muddy toe of one boot. I left no door unlocked, and certainly no lamps burning. His tongue slithered nervously over his empty gums. A visitor, then, an uninvited one. Do I go in and welcome them to my rooms? His eyes slid sideways into the shadows of the corridor. Or do I make a run for it? He was almost smiling as he shuffled over the threshold. Cane first, then the right foot, then the left, dragging painfully behind him. Glokta's guest sat by the window in the light of a single lamp. Brightness splashed across the hard planes of his face. Cold darkness gathered in the deep hollows. The square's board was set before him, just as Glokta left it, the pieces casting long shadows across the checkered wood. Why, superior Glokta, I have been waiting for you. And I for you. Glokta limped over to the table, his cane scraping against the bare boards, as reluctantly as a man limping to the gallows. Ah, well, no one tricks the hangman forever. Perhaps we'll have some answers, at least before the end. I always dreamed of dying well-informed. Slowly, ever so slowly, he lowered himself grunting into the free chair. Do I have the pleasure of addressing Master Valint or Master Balk? Bayaz smiled. Both, of course. Glokta wrapped his tongue around one of his few remaining teeth and dragged it away with a faint sucking sound. And to what do I owe the overpowering honor? I said, did I not? That day we visited the Maker's house, that we should have a talk at some point. A talk about what I want, and about what you want. That point has come. Oh, joyous day. The first of the Magi watched him. the same look in his bright eyes that a man might have while watching an interesting beetle. "I must admit that you fascinate me, superior. Your life would seem to be entirely unbearable, and yet you fight so very, very hard to stay alive. With every weapon and stratagem, you simply refuse to die. I am ready to die." Glokta returned his gaze like for like, "But I refuse to lose. Whatever the cost, eh? We are two of a kind, you and I, and we are a rare kind indeed. We understand what must be done, and we do not flinch from doing it, regardless of sentiment. You remember Lord Chancellor Ficht, of course. If I cast my mind a long way back, the Golden Chancellor. They say he ran the closed council for 40 years. They say he ran the Union. Salt said so. Salt said his death left a hole, into which he and Morovia were both keen to step. That is where this ugly dance began for me. With a visit from the Arch-Lector, with the confession of my old friend Salem Ruse, with the arrest of Sepdan Teufel, master of the Mince Bayaz, let one thick fingertip trail across the pieces on the square's board, as though considering his next beer's move. We had an agreement, Ficht and I. I made him powerful. He served me utterly. Ficht, the foundation on which the nation rested, served you. I expected delusions of grandeur, but this will take some beating. You would have me suppose that you controlled the Union all that time, Bayaz snorted. Ever since I forced the damn thing together in the time of Herod the Great, so-called. It has sometimes been necessary for me to take a hand myself, as in this most recent crisis. But mostly I have stood at a distance, behind the curtain as it were, a little stuffy back there, one imagines. An uncomfortable necessity. The lamplight gleamed on the Magus's white grin. People like to watch the pretty puppets. Superior. Even a glimpse of the puppeteer can be most upsetting for them. Why, they might even suddenly notice the strings around their own wrists. Salt caught a glimpse of something, behind the curtain, and only look at the trouble he caused for everyone. Bayaz flicked one of the pieces over and it clattered onto its side, rocked gently back and forth. Let us suppose you are indeed the great architect, and you have given as Glokta waved his hand towards the window. Acres of charming devastation. All this. Why such generosity? Not entirely selfless, I must confess. Khalul had the Gurkish to fight for him. I needed soldiers of my own. Even the greatest of generals needs little men to hold the line. He absently nudged one of the smallest pieces forward. Even the greatest of warriors needs his armor. Glokta stuck out his bottom lip, but then Ficht died, and you were left naked. Naked as a babe. At my age, Bayaz gave a long sigh, and in poor weather too, with Khalul making ready for war. I should have arranged a suitable successor more quickly, but my thoughts were elsewhere, deep in my books. The older you get, the more swiftly the years pass. It's easy to forget how quickly people die, and how easily. The death of the Golden Chancellor left a vacuum, muttered Glokta. Thinking it through, Zult and Morovia saw a chance to take power for themselves, and advance their own notions of what the nation should be, exceptionally cockeyed notions, as it happens. Salt wanted to return to an imaginary past where everyone kept their place and always did as they were told. And Morovia? Morovia wanted to piss power away to the people. Votus? Elections? The voice of the common man. He aired some such notion. I hope you aired the suitable level of contempt. Power for the people? Sneered Bayaz. They don't want it. They don't understand it. What the hell would they do with it if they had it? The people are like children. They are children. They need someone to tell them what to do. Someone like you, I suppose. Who better suited? Morovia thought to use me in his petty schemes, and all the while I made good use of him. While he tussled with Salt over scraps, the game was already won. A move I had prepared some time before. Glokta slowly nodded. Jezal Dan Luther, our little bastard, your friend and mine. But a bastard is no use unless Crown Prince Reynaud stood in the way. The Magus flicked a piece over, and it rolled slowly from the board and rattled to the table. We talk of great events. There is sure to be some wastage. You made it seem that he was killed by an eater. Oh, he was. Bayaz watched smugly from the shadows. Not all who break the second law serve Khalul. My apprentice, Yoru Sulfur has long been partial to a bite or two, and he snapped his 2 rows of smooth and even teeth together. I see. This is war, superior. In war one must make use of every weapon. Restraint is folly. Worse, restraint is cowardice. But only look who I am lecturing. You need no lessons in ruthlessness. No, they cut them into me in the Emperor's prisons, and I have been practicing them ever since. Bayaz nudged one of the pieces gently forward. A useful man, Sulfur, a man who long ago accepted the demands of necessity and mastered the discipline of taking forms. He was the guard, weeping outside Prince Renault's door, the guard who vanished into thin air the next day, a shred of cloth taken from the emissary's bedchamber, murmured Glokta. Blood daubed on his robe, and so an innocent man went to the gallows, and the war between Gurkish and the Union blossomed. 2 obstacles swept neatly away with one sharp flick of the broom. Peace with the Gurkish did not suit my purposes. It was sloppy of Sulfur to leave such blatant clues, but then he never expected you to care about the truth when there was a convenient explanation to hand. Glokta nodded, slowly, as the shape of things unfolded in his mind. He heard of my investigations from Severard, and I received a charming visit from your walking corpse, Mothis, telling me to halt or die. Exactly so. On other occasions Yoru took another face, and called himself the Tanner, and incited a few peasants to some rather unbecoming behavior. Bayaz examined his fingernails, all in a good cause, though superior, to lend glamour to your latest puppet, to make him a favorite with the people, to make him familiar to the nobles, to the closed council. You were the source of the rumors. Heroic acts in the ruined West? Jezal dan Luta. Bayaz snorted. He did little more than whine about the rain. Amazing the rubbish idiots will believe if you shout it loudly enough. And you rigged the contest too. You noticed that? Bayaz's smile grew wider. Bayaz's smile grew wider. I'm impressed. Superior. I am most impressed. You have fumbled so very close to the truth this whole time, and yet so very far away. I wouldn't feel badly about it. I have many advantages. Salt groped towards the answers, in the end, but far too late. I suspected from the first what his plans might be, which is why you asked me to investigate. The fact that you did not oblige me until the very last moment was the source of some annoyance. Asking nicely might have helped. It would have been refreshing, at least. I regret that I found myself in a difficult position. A case of too many masters. No longer, though, eh? I was almost disappointed when I found out how limited Salt's studies were. Salt, and candles, and incantations? How pathetically adolescent. Enough to put a timely end to that would be Democrat Morovia, perhaps, but nothing to pose the slightest threat to me. Glokta frowned down at the squares board. For all their cleverness, for all their power, their ugly little struggle was an irrelevance. They were small pieces in this game. So small they never even guessed how vast the board truly was. Which makes me what? A speck of dust between the squares, at best. What of the mysterious visitor to your chambers the day I first met you? A visitor to my chambers too, perhaps. A woman. And cold, angry lines cut across Bayaz's forehead. A mistake made in my youth. You will speak no more of it. Oh, as you command. And the great prophet Khalul, the war will continue, on different battlefields, with different soldiers. But this will be the last battle fought with the weapons of the past. The magic leaks from the world. The lessons of the old time fade into the darkness of history. A new age dawns. The Magus made a careless movement with one hand, and something flickered into the air, clattered to the center of the board, and spun round and round until it lay flat, with the unmistakable sound of falling money. A golden 50-mark piece, glinting warm and welcoming in the lamplight. Glokta almost laughed. Ah, even now, even here, it always comes down to this. Everything has a price. It was money that bought victory in King Guslav's half-baked Gurkish war, said Bayaz. It was money that united the open council behind their bastard king. It was money that brought Duke Orso rushing to the defense of his daughter and tipped the balance in our favor. All my money. It was money that enabled me to hold Dagoska as long as I did. And you know whose? Who would have thought? More first of the moneylenders than first of the magi. Open council and closed commoners and kings, merchants and torturers. all caught up in a golden web. A web of debts and lies and secrets, each strand plucked in its proper place, played like a harp by a master. And what of poor superior Glokta, fumbling buffoon? Is there a place for his sour note in this sweet music? Or is the loan of my life about to be called in? I suppose I should congratulate you on a hand well played, muttered Glokta bitterly. Bah! Bayaz dismissed it with a wave, forcing a clutch of primitives together under that Cretan Harad and making them act like civilized men, keeping the Union in one piece through the Civil War and bringing that fool Arnaud to the throne, guiding that coward Casimir to the conquest of England. Those were hands well played. This was nothing. I hold all the cards and always will do. I tire of this. And blah, blah fucking blah. The stench of self-satisfaction is becoming quite suffocating. If you mean to kill me, blast me to a cinder now and let's be done, but for pity's sake, subject me to no more of your boasting. They sat still for a long moment, gazing at each other in silence across the darkened table. Long enough for Glokta's leg to start trembling, for his eye to start blinking, for his toothless mouth to turn dry as the desert. Sweet anticipation. Will it be now? Will it be now? Will it be? Kill you? Asked Bayaz mildly, and rob myself of your winning sense of humor? Not now. Then why reveal your game to me? Because I will soon be leaving Adua. The magus leaned forwards, his hard face sliding into the light. Because it is necessary that you understand where the power lies, and always will lie. It is necessary that you, unlike Sult, unlike Moravia, have a proper perspective. It is necessary if you are to serve me. To serve you, I would sooner spend 2 years in the stinking darkness. I would sooner have my leg chopped to mincemeat. I would sooner have my teeth pulled from my head. But since I have done all those things already, you will take the task that Ficht once had, the task the score of great men bore before him. You will be my representative, here in the Union. You will manage the closed council, the open council, and our mutual friend the king. You will ensure him heirs. You will maintain stability. In short, you will watch the board while I am gone. But the rest of the closed council will never, those that survive, have been spoken to. They all will bow to your authority, under mine, of course. How willy I will be in touch. Frequently, through my people at the bank, through my apprentice Sulphur, through other means, you will know them. I don't suppose I have any choice in the matter, not unless you can repay the 1,000,000 marks I lent you, plus interest. Glokta patted the front of his shirt. Damn it, I left my purse at work. Then I fear you have no choice. But why would you refuse me? I offer you the chance to help me forge a new age, to bury my hands to the elbow in your dirty work, to be a great man, the very greatest of men, to bestride the closed council like a crippled colossus, to leave your likeness set in stone on the Kingsway, where its hideousness can make the children cry, once they clear away the rubble and the corpses, of course, to shape the course of a nation. Under your direction, naturally. Nothing is free, you know that. Again the magus flicked his hand and something clattered spinning across the squares board. It came to rest in front of Glokta, gold glinting. The Archlector's ring, the Archlector's ring. So many times I bent to kiss this very jewel. Who could have dreamed that I might one day wear it? He picked it up, turned it thoughtfully round and round. And so I finally shake off a dark master, only to find my leash in the fist of another, darker and more powerful by far. But what choice do I have? What choices do any of us truly have? He slid the ring onto his finger. The great stone shone in the lamplight, full of purple sparks, from a dead man to the greatest in the realm, and all in one evening. It fits, murmured Glokta. Of course, Your Eminence. I always knew it would. Chapter 51. The Wounded. West woke with a start and tried to jerk up to sitting. Pain shot up one leg, across his chest through his right arm, and stayed there, throbbing. He dropped back with a groan and stared at the ceiling. A vaulted stone ceiling, covered in thick shadows. Sounds crept at him now from all around. Grunts and whimpers, coughs and sobs, quick gasping, slow growling. The occasional outright shriek of pain. Sounds between men and animals. A voice whispered throatily from somewhere to his left. droning endlessly away like a rat scratching at the walls. Bloody wind! I can't see. Where am I? Somebody. I can't see. West swallowed, feeling the pain growing worse. In the hospitals in Gurkish there had been sounds like that when he had come to visit wounded soldiers from his company. He remembered the stink and noise of those horrible tents, the misery of the men in them, and above all the overpowering desire to leave and be among the healthy. But it was already awfully clear that leaving would not be so easy this time. He was one of the wounded, a different, contemptible and disgusting species. Horror crept slowly through his body and mingled with the pain. How badly was he injured? Did he have all his limbs still? He tried to move his fingers, wriggle his toes, clenched his teeth as the aching in his arm and leg grew worse. He brought his left hand trembling up before his face, turned it over in the dimness. It seemed intact, at least, but it was the only limb that he could move, and even that was a crushing effort. Panic slithered up his throat and clutched at him. Where am I? Bloody wind. I can't see. Help! Help! Where am I? Fucking shut up, Wes shouted, but the words died in his dry throat. All that came up was a hollow cough that set his ribs on fire again. A soft touch on his chest. Just be still. A blurry face swam into view. A woman's face, he thought, with fair hair, but it was hard to focus. He closed his eyes and stopped trying. It hardly seemed to matter that much. He felt something against his lips, the neck of a bottle. He drank too thirstily, spluttered, and felt cold water running down his neck. What happened? He croaked. You were wounded? I know that. I mean in the city. The wind. I don't know. I don't think anyone knows. Did we win? I suppose that the Gurkish were driven out, yes. But there are a lot of wounded. A lot of dead. Another swallow of water. This time he managed it without gagging. Who are you? My name is Aris. Dan Kaspa. Aris West fumbled with the name. I knew your cousin. Knew him well, a good man. He always used to talk about how beautiful you were. And rich? He muttered, vaguely aware he should not be saying this, but unable to stop his mouth from working. Very rich. He died. In the mountains. I know. What are you doing here? Trying to help with the wounded. It would be best for you to sleep now, if you, am I whole? A pause. Yes, sleep now, if you can. Her dark face grew blurry, and West let his eyes close. The noise's agony slowly faded around him. He was whole, would be well. Someone was sitting next to his bed. R.D., his sister. He blinked, worked his sour mouth, unsure where he was for a moment. Am I dreaming? She reached forward and dug her nails into his arm. Ah, painful dream. No, he was forced to admit. This is real. She looked well, far better than the last time he had seen her, that was sure. No blood on her face for one thing, no look of naked hatred for another, only a thoughtful frown. He tried to bring himself up to sitting, failed, and slumped back down. She did not offer to help. He had not really expected her to. How bad is it? He asked. Nothing too serious, apparently. A broken arm, a few broken ribs, and a leg badly bruised, they tell me. Some cuts on your face that may leave a scar or two, but then I got all the looks in the family anyway. He gave a snort of laughter and winced at the pain across his chest. True enough. The brains, too. Don't feel badly about it. I've used them to make the towering success of my life that you see before you. The kind of achievement that you, as a Lord Marshal of the Union, can only dream of. Don't, he hissed, clamping his good hand across his ribs. It hurts, no less than you deserve. His laughter quickly stuttered out, and they were silent for a moment, looking at each other. Even that much was difficult. R.D., his voice caught in his sore neck. Can you forgive me? I already did, the first time I heard you were dead. She was trying to smile, he could tell, but she still had that twist of anger to her mouth. Probably she would have liked to dig her nails into his face rather than his arm. He was almost glad then, for a moment, that he was wounded. She had no choice but to be soft with him. It's good that you're not. Dead, that is. She frowned over her shoulder. There was some manner of commotion at one end of the long cellar. Raised voices, the clatter of armored footsteps. The king, whoever it was, nearly squealed in their excitement. The king has come again. In the beds all around, men turned their heads, propped themselves up. A nervous excitement spread from cot to cot. "The king?" they whispered, faces anxious and expectant, as though they were privileged to witness a divine visitation. Several figures moved through the shadows at the far end of the hall. West strained to look, but could see little more than metal gleaming in the darkness. The foremost shape stopped beside a wounded man a few beds down. "They are treating you well?" A voice strangely familiar, strangely different. "Yes, sir. Is there anything you need?" "A kiss from a good woman. I would love to oblige you, but I fear I'm only a king. We're a great deal more common than good women." Men laughed, even though it was not funny. West supposed that people laughing at your poor jokes was one advantage of being a monarch. "Anything else?" Maybe another blanket, sir. Getting cold down here at night, of course." The figure jerked his thumb at a man behind, Lord Hoff. West realized now, dragging along at a respectful distance. "Another blanket for every man here." The Lord Chamberlain, that fearsome scourge of the audience chamber, humbly nodded his head like a meek child. The king stood and moved into the light. Jezal Dan Luthar, of course. And yet it was hard to believe that it was the same man, and not only because of the rich fur mantle and the golden circlet on his forehead. He seemed taller, handsome, still, but no longer boyish. A deep scar on his bearded jaw had given him an air of strength. The sneer of arrogance had become a frown of command. The carefree swagger had become a purposeful stride. He worked his way on slowly down the aisle between the cots, speaking to each man, pressing their hands, giving them thanks, promising them help. No one was overlooked. A cheer for the king. Someone gurgled through gritted teeth. "No, no. The cheering should be for you, my brave friends, you who have made sacrifices in my name. I owe you everything." It was only with your help that the Gurkish were defeated. Only with your help that the Union was saved. I do not forget a debt that I promise you. West stared. Whoever this strange apparition was, who looked so like Jezal Dan Luthar, he spoke like a monarch. Jezal restrained him with a gentle hand on his chest, smiled and patted his shoulder as though he had been offering succor to the wounded his entire life, instead of getting drunk in shitholes with the rest of the officers and whining about such meager tasks as he was given. He drew close and saw West, lying there, his face lit up, though there was a tooth missing from his smile. "Call him West," he said, hastening over. "I can honestly say that I have never in my life been so pleased to see your face." Ere West moved his mouth around a bit, but hardly knew what to say. Jezal turned to his sister. "Ade, I hope you are well." "Yes," he said nothing else. They stared at each other for a long and intensely awkward moment, not speaking. Lord Hoff frowned at the king, then at West, then at R.D. He insinuated himself somewhat between the two of them. "Your Majesty, we should—" Jezal silenced him effortlessly with one raised hand. "I trust that you will soon join me in the closed council, West. I am in some need of a friendly face there, in truth. Not to mention good advice. You always were a mine of good advice. I never did thank you for it. Well, I can thank you now. Jezal, I mean. Your Majesty, no. Always Jezal to you, I hope. You will have a room in the palace, of course. You will have the royal surgeon. Everything possible. See to that, please, Hoff." The Lord Chamberlain bowed. "Of course. Everything will be arranged." Good. I am glad you are well, West. I cannot afford to lose you." The king nodded, to him, and to his sister. Then he turned and moved on, pressing hands, speaking soft words. A pool of hope seemed to surround him as he passed. Despair crowded in behind it. Smiles faded as he moved away. Men dropped back onto their beds, faces clouding over with pain. "Responsibility seems to have improved him," muttered West, "almost beyond recognition. How long will it last, do you think?" "I'd like to think that it could stick, but then I've always been an optimist." "That's good." Ade watched the magnificent new king of the Union striding away, wounded men straining from their cots for the slightest touch of his cloak. "That one of us can be. Marshal West, Jalenhorn I. Good to see you." West pulled back the blankets with his good hand, eased his legs over the edge of the bed, and winced his way up to sitting. The big man reached out and gave his hand a squeeze, clapped him on the shoulder. "You're looking well," West smiled weakly. "Better every day, Major. How's my army?" "Fumbling on without you. Croy's holding things together. Not such a bad sort, the general, once you get used to him, if you say so. How many did we lose? Still hard to say. Things are somewhat chaotic. Whole companies missing. Impromptu units still chasing Gurkish stragglers across half the countryside. I don't think we'll have numbers for a while. I don't know if we'll ever get them. No one did well. But the 9th Regiment were the ones fighting at the western end of the Agrient. They took the worst of." He fumbled for the words. West grimaced. He remembered that black column of whirling matter reaching from the tortured earth to the circling clouds. The debris lashing at his skin, the screaming of the wind all around him. What was it? I'm damned if I know. Jalen shook his head. Damned if anyone does, but the rumor is that this Bayaz was involved, somehow. Half the Agrient's in ruins, and they've barely started shifting the rubble. You never saw anything like it, that I promise you. A lot of people dead and all that. Bodies stacked up in the open. Jalen took a long breath. And there are more dying every day. A lot of people getting ill. He shuddered. This sickness, disease, always a part of war, not like this. Hundreds of cases now. Some die in a day, almost before your eyes. Some take longer. They wither to skin and bone. They have whole halls full of them, stinking, hopeless places. But you don't need to worry about that. He shook himself. I have to go. Already? Flying visit, sir. I'm helping to arrange Polder's funeral, would you believe? He's being buried in state by order of the king, that is to say, Jezal. Jezal Dan Luther. He blew out his cheeks. Strange business. The strangest. All that time, a king's son sitting in the midst of us. I knew there had to be a reason why he was so bloody good at cards. He slapped West on the back again. Good to see you looking so well, sir. Knew they wouldn't be able to keep you down for long. Keep out of trouble. West called after him as he made for the door. Always. The big man grinned as he pulled it shut. West took his stick from the side of the bed, gritted his teeth as he pushed himself up to standing. He hobbled across the expanse of checkered tiles to the window, one painstaking step at a time, and finally stood blinking into the morning sunlight. Looking down on the palace gardens, it was hard to believe that there had been any war, that there were any acres of ruins, any heaps of dead. The lawns were neatly trimmed, the gravel well raked. The last few brown leaves had fallen from the trees, leaving the smooth wood black and bare. It had been autumn when he set out for England. Could it really have been only a year ago? He had lived through 4 great battles, a siege, an ambush, a bloody melee. He had witnessed a duel to the death. He had stood at the center of great events. He had survived a slog of hundreds of miles through the bleak Angland winter. He had found new comrades in unlikely places, and he had seen friends dead before his eyes. Burr, Caspa, Cathal, 3 trees, all back to the mud, as the Northmen said. He had faced death, and he had delivered it. He shifted his aching arm uncomfortably in the sling. He had murdered the heir to the throne of the Union with his own hands. He had risen, by a stroke of chance that verged on the impossible, to one of the highest posts in the nation. Busy year. And now it was over. Peace of a kind. The city was in ruins, and every man had to do his part, but he owed himself a rest. Surely no one would begrudge him that. Perhaps he could insist on Aristan Caspa to tend him to health. A rich and beautiful nurse seemed like just the thing he needed. You shouldn't be up. Ardi stood in the doorway. He grinned. It was good to see her. For the last few days they had been close, almost as it had been long ago when they were children. Don't worry. Getting stronger every day. She walked across to the window. Oh yes, in a few weeks' time you'll be strong as a little girl. Back to bed. She slid one arm under his and took the cane from his hand, started to guide him back across the room. West made no effort to resist. If he was being honest, he was starting to feel tired anyway. We're taking no chances, she was saying. You're all I have, I'm sorry to say. The man is utterly loathsome, of course, in a way. Terrifying and pitiful at once. And yet, having had no one else to talk to, I find that I've strangely warmed to him. He used to be loathsome in an entirely different way. I've never been sure quite why I warmed to him then, and yet I did. I suppose there's no. He felt a sudden wave of sickness cramp up his guts, stumbled and almost fell, sank onto the bed, stiff legs stretched out in front of him. His vision was blurry, his head spun. He pressed his face into his palms, teeth gritted, as spit rushed into his mouth. He felt RD's hand on his shoulder. Are you all right? Yes, it's just I've been having these sick spells. The feeling was already passing. He rubbed at his sore temples, then the back of his skull. He lifted his head and smiled up at her again. I'm sure it's nothing. Call him. There's hair wedged between his fingers. A lot of hair, his own by the color. He blinked at it, mystified, then coughed with disbelieving laughter. A wet, salty cough from down under his ribs. I know it's been thinning for years, he croaked, but really, this is too much. Ardy did not laugh. She was staring at his hands, eyes wide with horror. That's it for today's video. The next part arrives tomorrow. Subscribe so you don't miss it.